Introducing Hearth-Bolton I, the founding hero and silver lion of the Empire. In his youth, he won countless wars in the name of Augusta's empire. Under his command, the state captured all the other kingdoms, spreading across the entire continent of Edgar. For his military achievements, he was granted the title of Duke, and bathed in money and glory, he died unexpectedly. Having lived only 26 years, he neither married nor had any heirs. His title passed to his blood brother, and now, 100 years later, the heir moves into the residence. Head maid Dolly Lopez announced to her subordinates the arrival of Andres Bolton V, who had taken over as Duke. The young maids were very excited because they would see the legendary hero's great-nephew for the first time. Dolly said that until he came of age, the new Duke lived at the Imperial Academy. The new master was truly very handsome, and the maids could not take their amazed glances off him. But even more attention was paid to his companion, who was pretty, but behaved too freely. They even overheard them talking about how the Duke would dance with his companion at the ball if she agreed to stay the night at the estate. My lord did not like the servants' close attention and asked how they dared to stare at him like that. Dolly asked the new master to be merciful, since the maids had just arrived and had not yet learned the rules of the estate. Noting that the new maids turned out to be ignoramuses and monsters, he asked them not to disgrace him at today's ball. The butler added that the head maid must take responsibility and be punished. The maids sympathized with Dolly, but she said it was okay and was a little hasty, as there weren't enough workers. She wanted to show the girls a portrait of the legendary hero Bolton I, and they gasped in surprise. And there was a reason for this, because the new Duke was the spitting image of his famous ancestor, the founder of the dynasty. They were ready to discuss heredity further, but the head maid reminded them that they still had a lot of work to do. Dolly repeated to each maid which part of the estate they needed to tackle first in order to make it before the dance. The girls, although they were simple servants, still dreamed a little about how they too would be able to find a handsome aristocrat. The head maid did not hear the conversation itself, but from their dreamy faces she guessed what they were chatting about. Our hero, even though he was a ghost, still agreed with the new Duke that the new girls were some kind of idiots. He mimicked them, how they bothered Dolly with their questions, how they managed to forget everything, and considered them useless. Then I thought about who exactly this Andres was calling a bogeyman, because Dolly is the sweetest girl in the whole wide world. This is how the spirit of Bolton I was indignant, and if he could touch him, he would definitely have given his descendant a good beating. But ironically, he was a ghost who, after his death, was imprisoned in the residence for many years by unknown forces. He was also very indignant that this brat had decided to hold a ball on such an important date for him. He remembered as if it were yesterday how 5 years ago the inexperienced Dolly had first entered the residence and joined the staff of servants. Dolly, who was slandered and punished on the very first day, secretly came to his portrait and quietly cried under cover of night. Our hero didn't know how it happened, but for the first time in more than 100 years of solitude, he felt sympathy for someone from the estate. So the days passed and he still couldn't take his eyes off her, and his need for her grew and grew. For the next 5 years, he was by her side almost every moment, although she never acknowledged his presence. These years flew by in the blink of an eye, and Dolly grew into a beautiful woman, and the first meeting seemed like it was yesterday. In his eyes, she was the most tender and responsible cutie, and he wanted to talk to her like everyone else could. And now they called her to tell her that they had almost finished cleaning, but there weren't enough people in the kitchen, and they were asking for help. As head maid, she agreed, and Hart again became indignant that she was constantly being bombarded with work. That she so rarely gets to be alone, and today she hasn't even sat down once, and it's their anniversary together. Dolly sincerely believed that if the legendary hero in the portrait were alive, justice would prevail. She quietly said that fortunately he hadn't laughed yet, and, taking out a flower, added that exactly 5 years ago they first met. She thanked him for supporting her all these years and asked him to continue to look after her. This speech touched our ghost very much, because it turned out that Dolly also remembered their first meeting well. She even brought him such a cute little flower as a token of gratitude, and this shocked him incredibly. But at the same time, he felt helpless, because he had no way to thank her. Thinking that they were probably soulmates made in heaven, he was overjoyed. A hope was born in his ghostly soul that someday in the future they could be together forever. There was incredible bustle in the kitchen. The head chef asked Dolly to prepare the dishes for the first courses. She asked him not to worry, then he added that they still needed to count the number of guests in the hall. When Dolly replied that she would do that too, the ghost thought that she would most likely only be able to fall asleep at dawn. It suddenly dawned on him that he was free, so he could very well help her and count the arriving guests. Having flown into the hall, he began to count, and then, taking a closer look, he thought that nowadays aristocrats were wearing dresses of a completely different style. Then he mentioned that, apparently, the empire was still thriving, and he became interested in whether he knew anyone. He even laughed when he realized that he was seeing a descendant of Count Derry, because he looked exactly like his great-grandfather. What amused him most was the fact that the Count's family still hadn't gotten rid of their baldness. He even brushed away his ghostly tear as memories of bygone days suddenly came flooding back to him. Then the words of Andres's new passion reached his ears. She asked if he was telling her the truth, and she asked him not to fool her, to which the Duke replied that how could he, since he was now the Duke of Bolton, the new owner of the estate. Our ghost considered Andres to be very immoral, although he and his grandfather remained spiritually pure until their last breath. But unfortunately, Andres looked like a copy of him, and he was worried that Dolly would think that he was the same Casanova. Then his attention was drawn to the glass in the hands of the new Duke. It seemed to him that something was wrong with it. It was definitely red wine, but there was a purple tint to it, indicating poison. Hart thought that someone was targeting Andres and wasn't even afraid of being discovered, since they had so openly slipped him the poison. The Duke's companion suggested that he go to the restroom, citing the fact that she was a little tired. The Duke was about to drink some wine before having a good rest, but our ghost was seriously scared. Is his descendant really so careless and doesn't notice anything around him, and he can't even warn about danger? He saw how the glass was emptied, and at first he was even a little upset, but then he thought about something else. What can you do if Andres is a real blockhead? The only thing that's a pity is that the new Duke looks so much like him. On the other hand, well, let him die. The old man of the fourth generation has a dime a dozen illegitimate children. His attention turned to Dolly, who had just entered, and he told her how many guests there were, so that she wouldn't have to count them. He knew, of course, that she would still strain herself because she would not hear his prompts. She counted so hard that he became captivated, glad that she was double-checking everything for greater certainty. Hart thought about the future again, and promised himself that he would definitely be more responsible in the future. He began to dream, because if only they had been born in the same era, everything could have been completely different. I could kiss her, touch her, have casual conversations, and twirl her around in a dance at the same ball. He wanted to tell her that there would be no need for desserts at all, because something was about to happen. But his silent warning was not needed, because at that very moment Duke Andres died. All one could do now was shrug their shoulders. Hart had no idea who the poisoner was, but the method chosen was simple and effective. For our ghost, this was a good thing because Dolly could return to her home and rest in peace and quiet. And he was about to rush into her room when some inexplicable feeling took hold of his body. There was suddenly such a pain in his chest. He hadn't felt anything like this for a long time, and it was just the beating of his heart. Listening to his feelings, he realized that his head was spinning. He was afraid that he was disappearing forever. But he didn't want this. He wanted to be next to Dolly and follow her forever, but her image before his eyes began to slowly melt. He screamed her name, repeating it over and over until he jumped up in bed and saw the white light again. His first thought was that he was not lost and he was glad, but still there was something unusual in his joy. It took our hero some time before his thoughts finally formed. Turning his head, Hart saw his reflection, which he had not seen in the last 100 years. Hart Bolton looked back at him from the mirror, just as he remembered himself in the last days of his past life. This Andres looked and even moved like him. Our hero realized that the panic of realization was overcoming him. He had no idea how this could have happened, but the fact remained it was him again, but in a different body. Trying to calm down and control his trembling, he began to peer into the reflection, looking for answers. If he became Andres, then where did the old one go? Maybe he died, and he somehow incomprehensibly took his place. And although he still couldn't believe it, it turned out that thanks to the poisoner, he was able to get a new body. It was a little strange for Hart to feel and sense after so much time, but how pleasant it was. He was distracted from these thoughts by Vrana, the estate's chief manager, who exhaled at the sight of his master alive. However, when our hero asked for clothes, the butler noted that the gentleman still needed rest. Vrana asked the Duke if something was really that urgent, and our hero replied that he had a very important meeting scheduled. During the time that our hero was unconscious, an investigation was carried out at the estate, and the culprit was punished. Chief Maid Mana whipped her subordinate and demanded to know why she had poisoned the young master. The maid begged for mercy because she was not guilty of anything, and most likely she was simply slandered. Mana asked what was meant by the fact that she had deliberately slandered her, and added that she would beat her until she confessed. Dolly stood up for the maid, demanding that she stop bullying her until she received any evidence. After all, in the hall many maids were busy with drinks, and she also reminded that Mana also served wine. The head maid was angry that she was suspected of such a thing because she was higher in status than the others and was personally appointed by the new duke. Dolly responded to the raised voices that she was not blaming anyone, but she hoped that people would take this incident seriously. She ended her speech by saying that the head maid should take a more responsible approach to her duties. The other maids began to whisper, which further spurred the enraged Mana to rash actions. Growling, how dare Dolly doubt her words? Since she was the head maid, she was ready to whip her too. Ms. Lopez disliked violence and was not prepared to fight back, so she simply braced herself for the inevitable pain. But this did not happen, because at that moment everyone heard the Duke's words. That's where she had been all this time. All the servants turned around when they heard his voice, and the maids were glad that the new master had finally woken up. Our hero, beaming with happiness, asked Dolly not to move, because he would quickly come down to her. Everyone in the hall froze, and all sorts of guesses about what might happen next appeared in the maids' heads. Mana said angrily that the Duke had probably seen Dolly's insolence and would punish her for it immediately. The thought flashed through Dolly's mind that she would really need to explain everything to the new master urgently. She knew she was innocent, so she was about to tell him everything, but once she was in the air, she couldn't utter a word. She had no explanation for his actions. She had no idea why he had picked her up in his arms and was spinning her around in front of everyone. She felt extremely uncomfortable. She suddenly found herself in a completely unexpected situation. The Duke said that he was hugging her just like in a dream. She was even more frightened than before. Suddenly, he lost his mind. Not knowing what to expect in such a situation, she asked to be put back on the floor, but the Duke did not hear her. He had been waiting for this moment for so long that all he could do was enjoy the heat of her body and smell the scent of her body. Pressing himself against her, he said that he was in seventh heaven, which puzzled the frightened maid even more. Mana decided to intervene and asked him not to let her confuse him, since Dolly had just covered for his poisoner. Forgetting for a moment about her situation, our heroine reminded us that one cannot accuse anyone without evidence. The new Andres asked who she was, to which Mana introduced herself and added that he had decided to promote her to head maid. She pointed out to him the brooch that was now on her collar and explained that it was he who had given her this jewel. She added that as soon as she found out that he had been poisoned, she immediately went to the temple and God, apparently, heard her prayers. To his remark that he remembered how this stone was his decoration, Mana replied that he was definitely wearing the brooch that day. But when he added that someone had then kidnapped it, Mana protested that he had apparently forgotten how he had personally given it to her. Our hero got into the swing of things and demanded that the butler send the maid away, and if she doesn't go herself, then he can throw her out. Vran didn't even bat an eyelid. He calmly replied that everything would be done and asked if there were any other instructions. The Duke asked that the ladies' dresses and jewelry be prepared so that they could bring everything they had, adding that that was all for today. When Dolly asked if she could now stand on her own 2 feet, she heard that she still had a date today. After this phrase, our heroine began to panic. She had hoped that her misadventures were over for today. However, she once again asked to let her go, but his lordship was adamant in his desire to go on a date. The butler was not very happy with the current state of affairs and did not have time to think about his next steps. Mana grabbed him and started babbling that he knew the truth and that the Duke himself had given her this jewel. She said that if she was thrown out with a black mark, not a single noble family in the capital would hire her. And she thanked the butler when he said he would write her a letter of recommendation as a reward for her loyalty. Vrana added that he would send people to accompany her, and when she arrived, she would convey such words that the Duke would come to his senses. Dolly had been responsible for cleaning the estate for 5 years now and knew that she must not disturb or interfere with her master's affairs. Now she is faced with the most serious threat of her life, called Andres Bolton and his unexpected passion. He asked her not to worry, but only asked for permission to put these neat shoes on her lovely feet. She couldn't refuse him directly, so she asked him shyly how she dared to wear such fancy shoes. The Duke insisted, saying that he would simply put them on, then change her clothes, and they would go on a date. Dolly felt extremely awkward about the situation, wondering what all this ardor was about and whether he had known her name before. Meanwhile, his persuasion continued. He said that he would follow her until she agreed, and she had no choice. To top it all off, his lordship also thanked her for the honor and then added that the shoes fit like a glove. After all, every time he saw her working from dawn to dusk in uncomfortable shoes, he dreamed of doing it. It was said quietly, so she asked again. Then he, smiling, said that she looked absolutely stunning in them. When my lord kissed her foot, Dolly, quite involuntarily, made a wide swing. It happened instinctively. She didn't want to offend the Duke, but she was still scared to death of the consequences. Rushing towards him, she began to apologize with despair in her voice and ask how he was feeling. His nose started bleeding, but he ignored it and said that one of his wishes was for her to beat him one day. She felt uneasy, because she always treated her masters with due respect, but here she had no idea what to do. At the same time, seeing his reaction, she got the impression that the Duke was sincerely enjoying everything that was happening. He even said with some cheerful nonchalance that everything was fine, and the bleeding seemed to have stopped. It was all strange to her, why he treated some servant so well, but the Duke's thoughts were unknown to anyone. She had run out of any logical explanations for this behavior. She was simply waiting for this performance to end. While she was thinking in complete horror, Andres continued to praise her, saying that she was like an angel who had descended from heaven. He kept complimenting her, saying that although the maid's costume suited her, she was even more charming in this one. Dolly understood that anyone would be perplexed to see that a maid had been honored to dress in such chic outfits. She knew he had trained at the academy before inheriting the title, and there were rumors that he changed partners like gloves. Now he's spinning around her, and even praising her. Has he really decided to make her his new toy? She knew that because of his similar appearance to the founder of the family, hopes were pinned on him, and to prevent them from collapsing, he was exiled to the campus. Andres took advantage of his status, disregarding discipline, and was known as an ignorant, arrogant man, but there were worse rumors. However, all these gossips did not stop others from associating with him, because people wanted the patronage of the ducal family. Therefore, the young man refused no one and flirted with every noblewoman's skirt, and the affairs ended as quickly as they began. Our heroine wanted to ask if she had become the new target, but she was not allowed to interrogate the master. He saw her concern, but he no longer had the strength to postpone this date. He had been given this opportunity completely unexpectedly, and he was afraid of missing his chance to be with her. Having said that he valued every second spent with her, he gallantly invited the lady on a date. However, he had no idea what was really going on in the soul of his charming companion. It was so beautiful around that Dolly forgot for a while that she was a simple servant. And when he left her for a while, she thought that servants were forbidden to enter this garden without permission, but she always wanted to take a look. And now she found herself here and wondered if the Duke would allow her to walk here to enjoy the beauty of this place. Pulling myself together, I thought that I was daydreaming and I needed to stop making up nonsense and humbly follow my master's orders. Reminding himself to behave with caution and decorum, at that moment our hero returned. He did not come empty-handed and, saying that he had something for her, presented her with a wonderful bouquet. In fact, he had long noticed how she was looking intently at this garden, so he wanted to please her. Dolly, knowing the value of these flowers, asked him why he had picked so many, and he honestly replied that he thought she would like them. When she said that they were too expensive and she could not accept them, the Duke sadly said that then they would have to be thrown away. She couldn't explain to him why she couldn't accept it, but she didn't want to throw the bouquet away either. To tell the truth, she really liked these flowers, and she said shyly that if he didn't mind, she would accept the bouquet. And since she was an ordinary girl, she answered the Duke completely sincerely, which finally won his heart. Our hero had become so unaccustomed to human form over the last 100 years that he showed his feelings openly and impulsively. So when she asked him what was wrong, he replied that he felt as if he had ascended straight to heaven, because he saw an angelic smile, to which she cheerfully said that he was back with his jokes. Andres, getting excited, thought that she was laughing because she had become the head maid before that. She had not had a moment of peace. It had been a long time since he had seen her so happy, and she was so sweet in those moments that he wanted to kiss her. This desire was so strong and irresistible that he gave in to it without thinking about anything. Her alluring scent was so close that for a split second he forgot that he was no longer a ghost, but a person. Unlike the Duke, our heroine never parted with her body, so she reacted quite unequivocally to his attempt. The thought that he wanted to kiss her made her shudder. She was not ready to accept his advances. Feeling her reaction, he thought that now he was Andres Bolton, and Dolly had no idea that he had died a long time ago. Therefore, he must get closer to her gradually, so as not to scare her away and let her get used to him, lulling her vigilance. He realized that he had to act carefully, think through every step, in order to convey to her that he loved her. He thought that even a fool would understand that this was what he had to do, but he was tired of waiting. He had already suffered for too long. Still, he managed to cope with his impulse and, gathering all his will into a fist, asked, "She was very scared." There's no point in hiding it. She was scared, although she knew what he was really trying to achieve. This game of love was so popular among the nobility. She remained silent. Then he asked forgiveness for his lack of restraint and swore on his life that he was absolutely sincere. He continued that from now on she could safely reject him if she acted against her will, and he stopped. Then, a little more quietly, he added a request. He asked that she hated him, and Dolly answered that it was fine. To say that she was surprised is to say nothing. Our heroine could not have imagined that everything would turn out this way. But the way Andres looked at her in those moments could not leave her indifferent. She looked at him differently. She had a tiny hope that with the right approach he would eventually give up his courtship of her. The Duke, meanwhile, thought that he shouldn't have gotten so excited, and now he urgently needed to distract her with something. And in order to somehow smooth over the awkward situation, he, like a complete idiot, decided to invite her to look at the flowers. Having thus further discouraged her companion, she was completely at a loss, not understanding how to behave further. Then he asked her to speak up if she was angry, because he understood that he had made an unforgivable mistake. She replied that she didn't hold a grudge against him. It was just the first time she had encountered such a situation, and therefore she was confused. Having spoken, Dolly blushed, and he, interpreting her reaction in his own way, immediately suggested kissing for practice purposes. With a very careful movement, she pushed him away, mentally choosing the words to explain her opinion. But she never plucked up the courage, thinking that refusing the master, being a simple servant, was unforgivable. Thinking that it was so wonderful to be alive, he said that she was smart, and later he would show her self-defense techniques. It was a strange proposal, and when she asked who it was from, she heard that it was from him if he started pestering her. He also added that she could beat him up, and our heroine laughed at such a high-flown joke. Her sincere laughter pleased the Duke, and he thought that at last she was laughing and how that smile suited her. He decided that he would pray that Dolly would always remain like this, and for this he was ready to make any sacrifice. The atmosphere between them warmed up considerably, and on this wave he suggested going on a promenade tomorrow. The butler interrupted them and reported that Crown Princess Sharon had arrived. Andres was surprised, because he had just woken up. Vrana explained that the Emperor was worried because the Duke had not woken up for a long time, so he sent his daughter to check on him. The Crown Princess was the most noble woman in the Empire, known as the ever-blooming Yellow Rose. As the eldest daughter, she won the love of the Emperor and was declared the next Empress at the age of 10. Dolly remembered that it was said that at one time the Duke had been downright obsessed with the Crown Princess, and deciding that he should still meet with Sharon, she said so, and the news of his well-being should reassure the Emperor. The Duke could not refuse her, but asked her not to go anywhere. He would return soon, and she promised to wait. He asked again to wait, and the butler reported that the Crown Princess was waiting for him in the reception room. Our heroine, waving her hand, thought that she had no idea that the Duke was so clingy and looked at Vran. From his look, she guessed that this was a warning servants should not command their master, and she had crossed the line. Andres was only concerned about Dolly waiting, and why meet the princess if everything was okay with him and he wasn't dead? Lady Sharon Augustus, waiting in the reception room, recalled her previous meetings with the Duke and the note on which their parting had been. She was genuinely concerned about his well-being, and even if her father hadn't sent him, she would have gone to check on him herself. When he reached the reception room, the Duke was surprised that it was so far away. Then he realized that moving as a ghost was faster. He thought that he would still have to get used to a lot of things again when he heard the Crown Princess's greeting. One look at her was enough to understand that she was the daughter of his friend Marshal Augustus, the founder of the Empire. They were absolutely identical, and if he had dressed up in women's clothing, he would have looked exactly the same. Our hero almost called the Crown Princess Marshal, but stopped himself because he was now Andres and he had to play along, even if he didn't want to. Having apologized for keeping her waiting, he asked how he could be of service to such a noble lady. The Crown Princess replied in a slightly icy tone that she had come to inquire about his well-being on behalf of her father. And as she can see, Sir Andres is no longer in any danger, so the Emperor can rest easy. Then the Duke opened his mouth and said that since she had found out everything she wanted, he asked her to leave immediately. In response to her surprised exclamation, he explained that he was speaking literally since she had completed the task, she could leave. He added that, in general, he was not going to see her off and asked Vran to find someone who would accompany the princess. The butler, already in the reception room, began to say that such behavior was unacceptable towards Lady Sharon. That was too rude and the gentleman should go back and apologize, at which point the Duke stopped abruptly. I asked him to tell me if this was just a taunt and a sign of concern, or if Vran was trying to control his owner. When the butler replied that he was only concerned about his reputation, the Duke said that he was being evasive, although he himself recently reprimanded Dolly for a similar act and added that he was a faithful servant who cared for his owner. And while we're on the subject, there's one little animal that's also very loyal, and how about showing your devotion? A small twinkle appeared in our hero's eyes when he asked if he would let him hear his bark. Seeing the reaction, the Duke asked if Vrana was not loyal to him, and he had better prove it, otherwise he would begin to doubt whether his intentions were pure. For a few moments there was silence in the corridor, and one could hear the bees in the garden collecting honey. The butler was put in a hopeless situation, so he barked and then said that now they should believe him. He looked at his master and waited for approval, but instead he saw that his action only made Andres laugh. It was very insulting, although what else could the butler expect from this spoiled and dim-witted youth? He even swallowed the Duke's remark that it was just a joke, and he went and believed it. Then Andres said that he would recognize him, and he would apologize to the princess next time if the world did not collapse. When he added that a real dog takes care of his owner like that, Vran thanked him for the praise and quietly hissed, "Little bastard." Meanwhile, the former headmaid reached her new place of work, which was lost somewhere in the Empire. Knocking loudly on the blind door, she shouted that she had a message about the Duke, which was conveyed by Vran's butler. Our hero had no time for the intrigues that had long been woven behind the back of his predecessor. He was thinking about Dolly. His long-awaited meeting with her had been so unceremoniously interrupted by the visit, and now he was going to continue it. Mana followed the servant and thought that there were a lot of books here, and she didn't know what kind of aristocrat lived in the manor library. She had never heard anything like it, and when she saw Raven in front of her, she was simply dumbfounded with surprise. However, the man corrected her, saying that he was his older brother and asked her to maintain decorum in front of his master. After apologizing, she heard the owner's question. He asked her to share the content of the message that Vrana had conveyed. Mana thought that news of the Duke's recovery would soon spread, which is why the butler asked to convey a message about this very thing. She said out loud that the Duke had woken up and nothing more, but for the owner this turned out to be truly excellent news. Without showing her his face, he thanked her and asked Viral to give her some gold and send her on her way. But Mana didn't agree on that, so she said that Vrana had promised that she could stay here as a servant, that she was previously the head maid at the Duke's residence and could handle all assignments perfectly. The aristocrat agreed, adding that she would serve in his estate and could ask Vral if she needed anything. Having thanked him, Mana thought that since Vrana treated this aristocrat with such respect, he must be an important bird. But her candidacy raised doubts in Viral, and he asked whether the thrown-out maid deserved such mercy. The gentleman thoughtfully replied that a grateful pawn is much easier to control than an offended one. Dolly felt awkward that the girls she had previously worked with were now forced to look after her. In the end, everything turned out the way it did, and she became a new target for the Duke, and that is why she deserved such attention. She kept wondering what his choice was due to, a simple whim or a change in tastes, and why her in particular. When did she manage to attract his attention, and how wonderful it would be if she knew the true reason? Andres gave his new body a C grade, although the Duke looked like him. He was far from his figure at that age. But thanks to the naivety and hot temper of the former Duke, no one even noticed that the owner of this body had changed. This is how our hero reasoned while he was waiting for Dolly, but when she finally appeared on his doorstep, he was speechless. Her smooth, long curls scattered over her fragile shoulders, her plain negligee emphasizing her snow-white skin. He looked at her so greedily that he even forgot about the rules of decency and came to his senses only when she called out to him. Having apologized, our hero invited his lady love to sit down, and she began to look around warily. She knew perfectly well that this was his bedroom, but she didn't understand where she should sit, so as not to look approachable. The Duke saw her confusion, so he asked if something was wrong, and she replied that nothing special and everything was fine. And what else could our heroine answer in such a situation, when she had no choice and was terribly worried about it? But he was prepared because last year Dolly told her friends that she wanted to try this wine. He managed to surprise her, because it was the same red one that is opened only on national holidays. Dolly said that this was not possible, because this was a special wine for noble guests, and he asked to throw away all these conventions. Having explained that the entire cellar was filled with this wine, she wondered how one could possibly treat a maid to such an expensive drink. Moreover, he was sent away in a similar manner just recently, and how can he now drink alcohol so calmly? She thought that perhaps the Duke had chosen her for this reason, since for most nobles the life of a servant is not worth a penny. Since he had only dated aristocrats before, he probably doesn't want to put their lives in danger now. Nowadays, he feels sad without female attention, which he cannot refuse even at the cost of the death of some replacement. Before the wine was put on the table, our hero ordered that old scoundrel to taste it. He assumed that Dolly was so happy that she was speechless and was expecting a kiss as a thank you. It never occurred to him what thoughts flashed through her head before she said, "If we're going to go for a walk, let's go for a walk." Then she drained the glass in one gulp, so quickly that he didn't even have time to blink, let alone stop. The degrees quickly spread throughout her body, causing her cheeks to become flushed and causing a storm of delight in the Duke. He thanked the Lord for such cuteness. He compared her cheeks to apples in combination with her misty emerald eyes. Her head started spinning, but she didn't feel any other discomfort, so she decided there was no poison. I thought I should tell the Duke that the wine was not poisoned and was safe, but my tongue was barely moving and everything was swimming before my eyes. When our heroine collapsed right on his chest, he realized that she had clearly had too much to drink and was completely drunk. He cheerfully noted this, and then she, like everyone in that state, began to justify herself, saying that she was as sober as a judge. I even tried to convey to him my idea that the wine was not poisoned, but this information was no longer important to him. Having asked them to forget about drinking, Andres said that since this had already happened, they would have to go to bed earlier than planned. The Duke picked her up in his arms as if she were a feather and said he would carry her to the bed. She repeated the word bed in her mind and, with her clouded mind, tried to figure out what it meant. The Duke was very gallant and asked her to fall asleep first, while he asked the servants to clean the table. However, no matter how drunk she was, she could not sleep peacefully until she had clarified one important question. She had a hard time formulating her thoughts correctly, but she started by saying that she didn't understand much about such things. Dolly saw that the Duke was listening with genuine attention and finished by asking if they would sleep together. For a second, she thought he hadn't heard her question, but he hadn't. He couldn't believe he'd heard it. The Duke was a man who had been watching her for many years without even being able to touch her. Therefore, for him it was already happiness that he was able to spend the whole day with her, and if the night would be his, then it would be double luck. Inspired by such a tempting offer, he asked again, so she now allows him to sleep with her. The alcohol quickly evaporated, and our heroine realized that the Duke had taken her proposal in a slightly different light. His face was so close that Dolly could feel his breath. Her heart began to beat faster with excitement. Her thoughts were confused. She was not ready for such a hasty relationship, but she could not refuse him as her master. Since she remained silent, Andres took this as consent and said that it was good that she had suggested it herself. She couldn't believe she had suggested it herself, but there was no turning back. The Duke had moved on to more active actions. Like a starving beast, he frantically bit into her lips, as if trying to satiate himself with something he had been missing for many years. Feeling his passionate kisses, she thought that it couldn't be that he was really going to, although perhaps she should resist and allow the Duke to do whatever he pleases. She calmed herself with the thought that the sooner he got what he so desired, the sooner he would cool towards her. But even so, she couldn't convince herself everything was happening too quickly, because just recently he hadn't even noticed her. She pushed him away, swinging her legs rather unsuccessfully, and said with a trembling voice that everything was happening too fast. His face immediately trembled in pain. Half turning away, he felt everything inside him shrink. Andres froze in the ensuing silence, as if trying to hide his confusion and disappointment. Fearing that she had overdone it, she apologized and asked in a voice full of sympathy if it hurt him. He asked if she really hated him that much. Dolly answered no, but her answer did not sound very convincing. Feeling this herself, our heroine said that she did not hate him, and asked him to believe her. It was hard for him to say this, but the Duke said it anyway. It didn't matter if she just didn't like him. And he added that during the day he told her that he had made every effort to please her and prove the seriousness of his intentions. Without letting her get a word in, he continued. She shocked him, because first she invited him to sleep, and then she hit him in the face. She wanted to reassure him, so after saying she was sorry, she asked if there was anything she could do for him. The Duke quickly perked up and, stopping to mourn his bells, asked if she could stroke them to ease the suffering. Her face showed everything she thought about it, and he said that he would have to die in pain. Then the thought occurred to Dolly that, being a silent boor, she was not suitable for the role of someone's mistress. Gathering her strength, she asked the question that was bothering her why, out of all the servants, he chose her. Having stretched it out, he cheerfully replied that he really liked her, and added bashfully that he had let it slip. However, how could she take his word for it? All the ladies must have heard something similar, and they had only seen each other a couple of times. She said out loud that she, as a person of low status, was greatly honored to receive the master's favor. Having said that she was right, Dolly stopped short. She really didn't want this, but could she be so categorical? She realized that if he got angry and kicked her out, then she could not even dream of finding shelter in the city. She told herself that somewhere deep in her heart she knew there was no other way out but to obey. Not now, and later all that remains is to wait until the gentleman gets tired of it, just like all those ladies who came before her. She thought that it was too early for her to leave the residence, and due to certain circumstances, she had to stay here. After thinking about the situation, our heroine said that she was simply not ready yet, and the Duke, of course, clarified what exactly she was not ready for. It took him a few seconds to process her answer and move their relationship to the next level. The most important thing was that it was not a refusal, and the Duke happily said that she planned to accept his confession. Having impatiently asked when it would be ready tomorrow or the day after, I received a more sobering answer. She said that it would take a little more days, and his offer of 3 days did not suit her either. When she offered 10, he thought it was too long and countered with 5. She finally offered a week and wondered why they had even negotiated the matter. Andres was quite satisfied with this period, and he didn't even try to hide his overwhelming feelings. However, she did not share these feelings with him, because once the decision was made, it was too late to run away, and it was necessary to prepare for the future. Then she decided to ask him for one favor. At that moment he was ready to do anything. She asked that when he got tired of it and this whole farce was over, she could continue working at the residence. She continued that she swears that he can rest assured that she will no longer bother him and will quietly disappear. All he wants is to continue working here, and he even has the right to send her away, even to the stables. After listening carefully to her request, he quietly repeated the words that then she would simply quietly disappear. At first it shocked him greatly, but he had 5 whole years to test his feelings, so he agreed. Having said, "Let it be as she wishes," he muttered more, "if that boring day ever came." She heard the last words, but at that moment she could not even imagine what meaning was contained in them. It was enough for her that her place in the residence was preserved, so she sincerely thanked the Duke. Once the main points were settled, André suggested going to rest because it was getting late. He hugged her tightly and asked her not to worry, and to go to sleep peacefully. They would not go any further than that today. He wished her good night and asked her to get a good rest, because they had another date the next day. Hearing his snoring, our heroine thought that he had recently come out of a coma and was therefore quickly getting tired. However, she never found out why he chose her, and the Duke, apparently, has no intention of revealing the truth. But the Duke was thinking of sleeping, because Dolly believed that his confession was a joke, since Andres often had fun with others. This worried him greatly, because if he told her the whole truth now, would she be able to believe it? He imagined that she believed him and, surprised, would reciprocate his feelings or get scared and drive him away like a monster. He decided that he shouldn't take such a risk. It's better to hope that in the future she will be able to understand and share his feelings. Having made this difficult decision for himself, our hero leaned over and very quietly asked if she was asleep. The only answer he got was her quiet snoring, and he found it so cute that he couldn't resist stroking her. This charming young woman, whom he had dreamed about for so many years, was fast asleep in his bed. The light touches to her were so desirable that he had neither the strength nor the desire to refuse. He had been a ghost dreaming about this for so long that he had to talk himself into being more patient. He thought that if she agreed to be his, then he would wait for this moment no matter how long it took. He was ready to wait as long as it took for her to call him by name, hug him tenderly, and kiss him passionately. He was ready to patiently melt in anticipation, as if keeping in his heart every minute of opportunity, every hint of closeness. His dreams were getting closer and closer, and his whole being was trembling with anticipation that it would become reality. Dolly said that she understood that he simply wanted to change his image so as not to attract unnecessary attention. She looked at the Duke and, unable to contain herself, blurted out, "So why did his lordship choose a knight's costume?" Our hero was in a great mood, and no barbs from the charming lady could upset him. After wishing her good morning, he informed her that today she would be accompanied by a special knight, Hart. The busy streets of the capital were, as usual, very noisy, with residents scurrying back and forth about their business. However, our heroine felt that they were still attracting unwanted attention from the townspeople. So I asked the Duke if they really did look strange since everyone was looking at them like that. He reassured her that she was now his lady, and he was an ordinary knight, and asked her to simply call him Hart. She wondered if it was a coincidence that he had suddenly decided to take the name Bolton I as his alias. But she didn't specify, but asked where they were heading, and he answered where all the maids dream of going. They were greeted at Moses's boutique, and our hero announced that his lady wished to purchase some ball gowns. Dolly thought that only the richest nobility could afford a visit to such a boutique, while the rest could only dream of it. The store clerk helpfully offered to follow her, and she would show her the current season's dresses. There were so many noblewomen in the boutique that our heroine became curious if anyone would recognize the Duke. I thought that perhaps he was deliberately pretending to be a knight in order to hide his true identity. When he asked her if she wanted him to clear out the entire store for her, she thought he was getting a little carried away. There was such impatience in his eyes that she snapped back that she would simply try on things from the new collection. Knowing her real status, she felt uncomfortable seeing him trying to make a noble lady out of her. She was distracted from her thoughts by the saleswoman, who asked her to lift her foot so she could try on the shoe. As it turned out, all the footrests were currently occupied, and her knight informed her that changing shoes like that was risky. And he, as Milady's knight, is gladly ready to become her support, but our heroine thought this was wrong. She wondered how he could ask her to do something like that when there were so many people around and what it would look like. Luckily for her, the stand was found, and the Duke was upset because her heartless refusal broke his heart. But his behavior had already attracted unnecessary attention, and one of the ladies asked her friend if it was the Duke of Bolton. She replied that how could he dress up in a knight's uniform and even serve a lady in front of everyone? Andres also heard their remark about the unknown lady who hesitated with the simple knight. And I thought that their cackle could be heard a mile away. Years go by, and such vipers still don't die out. He even wanted to throw something at them, but decided that it was not worth ruining a perfect date. Moreover, several dresses had already been chosen, and he persuaded Dolly that she absolutely had to buy them all. She saw how polite he was and understood why the ladies were throwing themselves at him, but this enthusiasm made her a little nervous. Although she could not imagine that even when she was worried, she remained sweet in his loving eyes. Nearby, sweet potatoes were sold, which fed most of the common population and were grown in large quantities. Andres was distracted from his thoughts about her by this familiar smell, and it carried him away to a very distant, almost forgotten past. It was the first time she had seen such an expression on his face, as if memories were flashing before his eyes. So she even forgot that a couple of moments ago she was worried about whether the Duke would want to try simple food. But he became his old self again and suddenly offered her some sweet potatoes, which completely stunned Dolly. Andres actually bought a couple of things for them, and then she asked if he had tried them before. The answer to her was that yes, long ago, while on the road under cover of night, he often snacked on it, tasty and quick. She thought it was strange. Maybe it was somehow connected with his studies at the academy, and apparently it wasn't easy for him. She even thought about asking about it, but the Duke never ceased to surprise her with his unpredictable behavior. This time he managed to burn his tongue on a hot sweet potato and could think of nothing better to do than ask her for a favor. Thinking he had blisters on his tongue, he asked his companion to check if this was true. At that moment, he looked so defenseless that she instinctively wanted to reassure him. Wanting to protect him from pain, our heroine said that the dog and the cat are in pain, but our Duke is not in pain. Without realizing it, she was calming him down like a little child, and only when she looked into his eyes did she understand what she was doing. She got scared, thinking that she was finished, and quickly blurted out her apologies, explaining that she didn't mean to. The Duke, on the contrary, was so touched by her attention that he didn't care who she thought he was. He wanted a little more affection and asked why she was apologizing, adding that everything quickly helped. He looked at her with such an expressive gaze that she felt herself blushing. Her heart began to pound so loudly in her chest that Dolly thought it could probably be heard on the other side of the street. This had to be stopped immediately, and since she only had sweet potatoes at hand, that's what she hit the Duke with. Our hero was amused, because his lady was embarrassed again, and he really liked the way she blushed. The saleswoman couldn't resist asking if the two were a couple, but Dolly quickly protested. Unlike Andres, who replied that his aunt had a keen eye, but asked not to tell anyone since it was a secret. The woman, happy for them, offered them a couple more sweet potatoes, and the Duke gladly accepted such generosity. But our heroine's heart still wouldn't calm down, and she decided that it was time to switch to something else. And looking at the passers-by, I noticed that today there were many more noble ladies than usual. A man passed by her and dropped his watch. Dolly considered it her duty to return it to its owner. She noticed a man in a cloak and decided to give them to him at any cost before he got lost in the crowd. Our heroine rushed down the street so quickly that the Duke didn't even immediately realize that he was talking to thin air. Dolly never heard that their sweet potatoes were probably ready, and they wouldn't have to wait long. He looked around, but all that was left of his lady was her hat, which had apparently fallen off her head. Dolly always took good care of her things, so now, forgetting about the Duke, she rushed down the street after the stranger. After calling out to him several times, Miss Lopez thought he probably couldn't hear her and so didn't stop. She quickened her pace. The man was tall, so she didn't lose sight of him and soon caught up with him. Having stopped him, Dolly suddenly remembered the Duke, but since she had no intention of staying, she decided that it was okay. She needed to finish the job, but the stranger's golden hair distracted her attention. But the question of who she was brought her back to reality, and she apologized, replying that he had dropped his pocket watch in his haste. The man looked at her as if he didn't understand what the lady wanted from him, so she asked if it was his watch. Looking down at her, he replied that he was bored, and his lips twisted into a contemptuous smile. When she apologized, not understanding, he continued that he was addressing a lady of unknown origin. There was a hint of menace in his tone as the stranger lowered his voice and asked if she had completely lost her conscience. Our heroine's eyes widened in surprise. She had simply done a good deed, and yet they were talking to her in such a tone. The man said that she understood everything perfectly well and that he was already fed up with all of them with their harassment and antics. She watched his actions in silence, becoming more and more confused as to what he was trying to achieve by doing this. Having crushed this expensive watch right in front of her eyes, he said that it would not be a sin to call it disgusting. With his words, so that this ugly woman would look at herself in the mirror more often and know her place, he gave her a hint. As she watched him go, Dolly thought that he looked like an aristocrat, but his manners were pathetic, and he even decided that she was flirting. She felt bad that her actions were interpreted that way and did not understand how the watch was at fault. The Duke finally found Dolly, for whom he had become quite worried, and asked where she had suddenly run off to. She had not yet fully recovered from her previous experience, so she absent-mindedly replied that she was catching up with the man. By simply answering his question, she had no idea what a range of feelings she was launching with her answer. The word man was the only thing that interested our hero, so he asked who it was. His face was so unfamiliar at that moment that Dolly was completely confused with fear. The Duke asked why she was running after a man, whether they knew each other, and what their relationship was like. Finally, it dawned on her why the Duke was so agitated, and carefully choosing her words, she told him everything. It was all simple because she just picked up a pocket watch and wanted to return it to its owner. The emotions subsided, and our heroine apologized for having completely forgotten to warn him in all her haste. The Duke calmed down, and Dolly went on to say that she felt she had followed the wrong person and that she was very sorry. She also wanted to say that it was a shame because the watch was luxurious, but Andrés's mood changed again. Looking at her with guilty, apologetic eyes, he said that now his lady saw how jealous he was. She had to calm him down again, telling him that his jealousy would not make her start to hate him. Dolly thought that she didn't know this man at all, and some aspects of his behavior were different from what she had heard. Now she looked at him and understood that he was still worried about what had happened. At that moment, when he almost demanded an answer from her, he really did look a bit unusual for a duke. And no matter how you look at it, you wouldn't experience such feelings towards a randomly chosen toy. Their attention was drawn to a barker who was inviting them to sign up for a speed competition named after Hart. For victory, they promised a reward of 10 gold coins and a portrait of the legendary hero, something Dolly couldn't pass by. The Duke wanted to take her to another place because he felt awkward about the event dedicated to him. Bolton's portrait was such a tempting reward for her that Dolly simply could not resist. She was so inspired that she suggested they participate, and they rushed to register. Thinking that he had rarely seen Dolly so captivated, he was only surprised that his portrait was the reason. Andrés figured that she liked him so much that she was so determined to win the competition. He didn't want to disappoint his lady, so he decided to make amends and give her the victory. What a surprise awaited him when it turned out that Dolly herself decided to take part in this race. His eyes widened in amazement, and a smile of genuine delight played across his face. For a long time I couldn't believe my ears, as if I had encountered a surprise that delighted and inspired me at the same time. Dolly prepared herself and thought that she hadn't run for fun for a long time and hoped for the best result. The only thing that bothered her was the Duke, who was making a serious noise, trying to shout down all the other spectators. Deciding to ignore him, our heroine began to warm up, but got so carried away that she crashed into the man standing next to her. After apologizing for accidentally bumping into him, she looked up and saw the same rude stranger. He grinned and asked if she really wanted his attention so much that she decided to follow him the whole way. Her answer was that she had no idea what was going on in his life, but she was seeing his face for the first time. "And all this is nothing but a simple coincidence, so he can stop reflecting," Dolly added. The aristocrat thought it sounded true, but he was intrigued by how exactly she was trying to get his attention. Perhaps this woman is smarter than she seems, because when he goes out into the city, his mother informs all the nobles about his route. Since this one is among them, it means that his mother liked her, and she is suitable for the role of a bride. He assessed her as a greedy and capricious noble lady who was trying her best to occupy a higher position. Our heroine ran with ease and determination, her steps becoming faster and more confident. The stranger tried to keep up, his gaze full of determination. He could not allow her to get ahead of him in this competition. The spectators cheered the leaders with their shouts. Andrés tried harder than anyone else, because Dolly was first. Realizing that she was overtaking him, the man gathered his last strength and accelerated to snatch the victory from her. Finally, he managed to catch up with her, and a sinister determination flashed in his eyes. He suddenly made a risky dash to the side, intending to knock her off course and remove her from the distance. His heart beat in time with recklessness, and the dangerous idea of continuing the race at any cost was already flashing through his thoughts. The dastardly plan worked. His push knocked her off her rhythm, and he managed to snatch victory from this woman, albeit in this way. Andres and the spectators saw how the man who arrived first pushed the one in front, and this outraged them. But if the townspeople simply discussed it, then the Duke could not let it go unpunished, no matter who the person was. The aristocrat with hair like gold smiled and accepted congratulations he did not deserve. Having replayed the last seconds before the finish in her head, our heroine realized that what had happened was no accident. Seeing the disappointment in Dolly's eyes and knowing the true reason for the defeat, the Duke hastened to her aid. But I heard her say that she hoped the noble gentleman would not refuse to hold another round. The winner asked if it was so hard for her to accept defeat, and Dolly replied that she just wanted a fair result. The stranger asked if he was being accused of cheating, and the answer was that she was not accusing him of anything. She just wants him to compete with her again so they can see if the current result is true. And if in the end she loses, she will publicly apologize. These words made the Duke think. He knew that Dolly always became like that as soon as the conversation turned to injustice, and stuck to her guns to the end. Moreover, in these situations, she didn't care whether it was for herself or for someone else. She was the perfect queen of justice. The audience discussed the current situation, because if she asks for a second round, it means the winner played unfairly. What right did this herd of commoners have to suspect him, if they knew who he was? Thought the aristocrat. He said out loud that she herself was noble, but she hung out with dirty commoners, and he wished to enjoy the competition without him. Dolly couldn't even imagine that the man would get so angry, and it looks like that push was intentional. I thought that such tricks for the sake of victory were so in the spirit of this entire arrogant aristocracy. Before our heroine had time to come to her senses, she was surrounded by city residents and guests of the capital to congratulate her on her victory. She sincerely thanked everyone, but they surrounded her so tightly that she had no idea how she could get out now. The prince, and it was he who scolded Carlin for not taking all the noblewomen pursuing him to other places. The knight threw up his hands, and the prince added that one had nevertheless slipped through and deliberately disgraced him in front of a group of commoners. His Highness was very angry and said that upon his return he would ask the Empress who she was, and she would definitely get hers. Then he demanded that they bring him his cloak, because they were immediately returning to the palace, but Carlin did not answer. Not understanding why the knight had disobeyed him, the prince turned around and, seeing the stranger, asked if he was really a mercenary. The Duke, having finished dealing with his escort, announced that he had come to administer justice in the name of the Queen of Justice. Looking at Andreas, the prince noticed the knight's uniform and thought that perhaps he was that woman's henchman. He said out loud what kind of queen. As the tongue turned, "The only ruling family is the Augustan family." The Duke replied that it was not about the Augusti at all, and advised him to humbly accept the punishment for humiliating a nobleman. Considering this to be unheard of impudence, the prince asked if he knew who he was and introduced himself as the ruler Augustus IV. Although Hart lived out his last century as a ghost, it is not for nothing that he remained in people's memories as a silver legend. The body he inherited from the former Duke did its job perfectly, and he had not lost his fighting skills. And his famous sword never failed him, so he easily disarmed his young rival. The Duke didn't just disarm Marshall's descendant. After all, this blade was personally created by the court alchemist, and Augustus simply could not believe his eyes. Meanwhile, the Duke made another lunge, his movements showing confidence and experience. He looked at his defeated opponent with a cold gaze, feeling confident and invincible. A glint of cunning appeared in his gaze, as if the ghostly years had made him almost invulnerable to any harm. And the Duke behaved as if it was just child's play. He even sarcastically said that he was sorry. He said, well, so what if he missed by a hair, while the prince understood that his life was hanging by a thread? And he was completely at the mercy of this unknown but vaguely familiar knight, so he tried not to move. His opponent, with a flash of his eyes, said that he hadn't done this for a long time and had even gotten a little out of the habit. His blade was pressed against the heart area, and even a slight pressure would have been enough to end life. It was time for the Duke to return, and he said that he was leaving the prince alive only out of respect for Marshall. He also added that he no longer wanted to be in debt to this talkative guy. This small skirmish reminded him of the past, of the price that had to be paid for the conquest of this empire. The blood on his hands was not a simple metaphor, but a reminder of the bloody battles that shaped his destiny. Deep down, he felt the weight of responsibility and realized that every step forward cost him the highest price. He remembered the sacrifices he had to make and how much blood he had to shed for this future. But was this bloody path worth all that he had achieved, peace and power, or was the price too high for his conscience and soul? Deep down in his heart, he suddenly wondered how cruel this game had been, in which the price for him had turned out to be too high. And the voices of the fallen will continue to sound in his memory, reminding him of those who fell along the way and those who will never be able to find peace. Perhaps they will follow him everywhere like invisible shadows, causing his heart to clench with a feeling of bitterness and guilt. And as long as he lives, these voices will sound like a call for justice, for redemption, for the memory of forgotten victims. But he still understood that they would always be somewhere nearby, and he would have nowhere to hide from everything he had done. The sight of Dolly's happiness brought him back to reality. She had finally received the coveted portrait of Bolton I. The Duke asked her if she knew what kind of person this real Hart Bolton really was. Since childhood he was a despised slave, served the nobles, then one day, having killed his master, he joined the rebellion. Hart did not dream of high ideals about saving the world and the people, but was a simple executioner who chopped off heads for a hearty meal. And the title of hero is just a shiny wrapper in which the new dynasty wrapped his blood-stained hands. When the Duke said that the most ridiculous thing was that Hart took it with a calm soul, Dolly hit him. And she asked not to speak ill of Mr. Hart, and she knows everything he said, as in fact does the whole empire. However, it was thanks to heroes like Hart that the state rose from its knees and is now thriving. Not everyone has the courage to challenge their destiny, and the title of hero was not bestowed only for outstanding achievements, but also for his courage, which helped him get out of the swamp of fate, and she believes that those around him loved him precisely for this. Dolly even thought that she would like to one day become like him, and asked not to talk about him in that way. She was about to speak further, but Andres simply did not give her the chance because he hugged her tightly. At first, it seemed to her that he was angry with her because she hit him and wanted to explain himself. But when she heard his quiet words of gratitude, she realized that she was wrong. This was a completely different hug. And although our heroine did not understand at all why the Duke had just thanked her, she therefore did not get angry. However, she intuitively felt that this gratitude was extremely important to him and patted his back in a friendly manner. Dolly really couldn't have known how important, and most importantly, how timely her words about Hart turned out to be. Around the same time, in another noble estate, a maid was knocking on her young master's door. Having allowed her to enter, he, continuing to enjoy the view outside the window, asked that another vacation seemed to be dragging on a bit. Adding that she was not one to break her word, something must have happened that made her stay late. In the end, he asked the nanny to send someone to the Duke's residence so that they could return his younger sister to him. Already on the way home, Dolly scolded the injured Duke. She said that she did not know how he lost his things. But chasing a stray dog that stole a hat was an impulsive act, but fortunately there are no bite marks, just a scratch. And the Duke replied that that stupid little dog not only ate his sweet potato, but also stole the hat that belonged to Dolly. He considered this completely unforgivable, especially since there were visible marks from the teeth of that damn dog on the hat. Milord was unpredictable, as always, sometimes serious, sometimes chaotic, and when he was childish, Dolly had a hard time finding an approach to him. Just now they were hugging tightly and, from the outside, probably looked like a real couple. Having clarified that Dolly was not upset because of her chewed hat, the Duke was worried that it was all because of him. With eyes full of desperate anxiety, he looked at his companion and promised to buy her 10 more new hats. Thinking again about the extraordinary speed of his mood swings, she asked him to give her back the one she had for now. As our heroine put on her hat, she thought that, except for the misunderstandings, the day had turned out to be simply wonderful. Then she asked him, "Well, is she as good as before?" And the Duke said that she is delightful and the most beautiful lady in the empire. She noted to herself that the Duke never skimped on compliments for her, and for this she felt special. And although she understood that she was a simple appendage to his game of love, she was gradually drawn in too. She even felt a little funny, because when it was all over, she would still remember every little detail of this day forever. The way he promised to buy her 30 hats for every day of the month, and her response that she simply wouldn't have time to wear them out. She will remember how he gallantly offered her his hand, and she, albeit briefly, felt like a noble lady. They returned and the Duke asked if she wanted anything special for dinner. He told the cook to prepare it. Their pleasant conversation was interrupted by the butler, who reported that they had arrested him and were waiting for the Duke. Andres began to clarify who and why. Then Vrana explained that he was guilty of poisoning and that an interrogation was needed. Seeing the detainee, the Duke said with slight surprise that he was, after all, a simple ingredient delivery man. Turning to the delivery man, he asked that he had no reason to harm him and asked him to tell him who hired him. Lazily lounging on the sofa, the Duke asked not to detain him because he had dinner planned with a charming lady. Vrana thought that maybe it was just a coincidence then, because otherwise the Duke was still the same flighty air. The arrested man said he was innocent, but such a prestigious residence could not catch one criminal and was now punishing the innocent. The butler asked the Duke if they needed to extract the truth from him themselves, adding that they could do it in 3 days. And after the owner's remark that they would take so long to fix it, I thought that the stupid boy was being careless with his own life. He said out loud that he would ask to speed up the process, but the Duke surprised him because he said that he would take care of it himself. The Duke repeated that he would personally handle the torture so that nothing could interfere with their meeting with Dolly. And when the butler remarked that this was not right, he replied that why not after all? If you want something done well, then do it yourself. The arrested man squealed that he knew nothing and had been lied to, something the Duke was soon going to check personally. Our hero believed that the butler's presence could prevent him from learning the truth, and asked him to leave the door. When the delivery man said he hadn't added anything, the Duke sternly demanded that he stop talking nonsense and start telling the truth. While peeping, the butler thought that this hothouse youth could even know about torture. It was a waste of time. But the very next moment his eyes widened in amazement. He couldn't even imagine that such things could be learned at the academy. Before him was a completely different Andres Bolton, a kind of crushing machine who would achieve what he wanted by any means necessary. Even his voice when he said that he warned that he was very busy and did not have time for this nonsense was different. Quickly slamming the door, Vran caught his breath, and again the scene he had just seen appeared before his eyes. He wondered what that just was, Andres Bolton, but it just couldn't be. The heir to the duchy was sent to the Imperial Academy at the age of 3 and was an abandoned child. For more than a decade, during which he spent time at the academy, his every day was reported to the family estate. From any angle, the reports gave the impression that the heir was ignorant and worthless, but now the butler did not see in him the scum they had served just recently. Vrana realized with horror that the Duke looked more like someone who had risen from hell, the devil himself, thirsting for blood. In front of him was a man who looked like that Andres Bolton, but still it was a Duke unknown to the butler. Our hero did not immediately notice the servant, so he said that he had frightened him, and then asked why he had become quiet behind the door. He then shared that the guy probably received a lot of money and turned out to be more stubborn, but in the end he obediently told everything. The Duke asked if it would have been better to do it that way right away, but seeing Vran's distant face, he asked if he was listening to him. So many thoughts flashed through the butler's head that he could hardly grasp even the meaning of them. But if yesterday he simply did not resist the Duke's whim and barked, today he realized that he was truly afraid of him. He had to summon every ounce of his composure to ask if my lord had found out who the customer had been. The story went on to say that the delivery man had spoken to a middle-aged man, but would not be able to recognize him because he was hiding his face. He provided a tidy sum, and in return asked to slip a bottle of wine into the box with ingredients for the festive table. Vrana suggested finding out the identity, but the Duke considered it a waste of time, since the attacker was well disguised and covered his tracks. He suggested finding out who had a grudge against him. Perhaps it was one of his ex-wives, since there was only one step from love to hate. Hearing this, the butler thought that he was probably worrying in vain. The spoiled gentleman only thought of everything in that way. My lord continued that, however, it was not possible to smuggle wine of unknown origin into the estate so easily. He suggested that there was probably a spy in the residence from the very beginning, even though food was purchased from outside and wine was prepared in advance. It turned out that the accomplice brought the wine, and the spy repackaged it, and it ended up straight on the Duke's table. Perhaps this was the work of the old servant. Continuing to think out loud, Andres dismissed both enemies and rivals and came to the conclusion that he was someone's piece on the chessboard. The butler realized with horror that the Duke was thinking in the right direction and heard the question of what he thought about this. Vrana hesitated slightly before replying that the servant would certainly conduct a thorough investigation and report back. And when the owner said that he could be relied upon and thanked him for his efforts, he replied that he was simply doing his duty. After listening to the instructions to prepare a bath and a change of clothes, I thought that everything was not easy and something was definitely wrong. Perhaps the Duke's carelessness was feigned, but in all cases he must report this as soon as possible. Our hero, sniffing his clothes, thought that they smelled terribly and that he would have to rub himself 3 times so that Dolly wouldn't breathe in blood. Meanwhile, the maids were asking our heroine about her impressions of the expensive Moses boutique. When I replied that it was lovely there and the service was top-notch, I heard that the girls also dreamed of going there at least once. They were also interested in what the Duke was like when he was in love, and they asked him to tell them whether he was as strict as before or not. Dolly began to remember her day, how the Duke was happy that she would now have a lot of dresses, how funny it was that he burned himself on a hot sweet potato, how he almost burst into tears when she saw how jealous he was of her stranger, and with what enthusiasm he complimented her. She said that he was sweet, although sometimes he acted childishly, making everyone around him sit on pins and needles. The maids wondered if they were really talking about the same Duke. They couldn't even imagine such a gentleman. But they were still pleased by the fact that the Duke liked Dolly, and they hoped that he would not turn out to be as flighty as they said. While packing her things, our heroine said that he promised that she would be able to continue working, even when his feelings for her passed. She then added that she was therefore glad that she would be able to continue seeing him, but that was not the only thing that worried the maids. One of them asked why she had packed so many things, why she needed so many clothes in separate rooms. Then Dolly told them that she was actually planning to go on a trip, and the girls became very excited. The suitcase was packed, and she said with some sadness in her voice that she would be traveling alone and that it would be a very long journey. She was a little worried that she had not warned the Duke of her departure, but she thought that perhaps it would be even better this way. She asked the girls what day it was, maybe a vacation day, but they didn't have time to answer her. Another maid burst into the room and announced that a carriage had arrived for Miss Lopez and that the coachman had said that he was from Count Lopez. But rumors among servants spread like wildfire, and the Duke of Bolton's residence was no exception. Our hero was taking a bath and getting ready for dinner with a charming lady when one of the servants told him about a carriage from the Count's house. Not paying attention to his appearance, he ran to Dolly, and when he got there, he asked if she was really going home. Having answered in the affirmative, she explained that due to what had happened the other day, all his vacations had been postponed, but now he had recovered. She continued that it was her family who had demanded her back, and when the Duke sneezed, she insistently asked him to return to the house. Of course, he didn't listen, and she, asking him not to worry, added that she would return the day after tomorrow, and they could have dinner together. Her departure was a big blow to him. He asked her to come back quickly, and he would wait for her the day after tomorrow from the very morning. The butler advised the gentleman to return to the house and wondered if the rumors about Dolly and Count Lopez were true. However, the Duke did not hear his words in his upset feelings. He thought only about how lonely he would be these 2 days without her. Then he pulled himself together and decided that he was strong and could handle it, and Dolly probably missed her family very much, which is why she was in such a hurry. And although the Duke had watched her for 5 whole years as a ghost, he still did not know so much about her. Our heroine also left the residence with a heavy heart, but pleasant encounters with the past and not so much awaited her. The road to Count Lopez's estate was not very long, but she still reached it when it was already completely dark. The moon shone brightly on the driveway, where every little detail held memories of times gone by and hidden secrets. She was met by Eva, the nurse and housekeeper at the Lopez estate, a woman of very strict principles. She greeted Dolly with the words that she had been gone for so long and that she couldn't even imagine how worried Mr. Vincent was. After apologizing, our heroine heard that she should hurry up because the young gentleman was still waiting for her. Eva started talking about how she was sent to work for the Duke for so many years that she would gain experience and not forget her roots. And she needs to remind herself every minute that the Lopez family is her only home, and she is honored to bear this family name. That the greatness of the family should be a priority, both at home and abroad, and one should never defame the name of the family and the young master himself. Dolly had heard these instructions 1,000 times before, so she listened to them with half an ear, indulging in memories of her childhood. Every nook and cranny of these corridors reminded her of how she and her brother used to run here and sometimes play hide and seek. Now he has grown up and become a young gentleman, but for her he will forever remain the same green-eyed tomboy as before. Eva said that the gentleman was waiting inside, but she reminded Dolly that she should know her place and observe the rules of decency and never go beyond the limits. But our heroine remembered all these rules from those distant and immemorial times of childhood. Opening the massive door, the housekeeper reported to the young gentleman that Dolly had deigned to return. Vincent chuckled. Tilting his head slightly, he knew that the nurse liked to make a little performance out of every event. But it wasn't she who interested him now, but Dolly, who asked for forgiveness for being late. He said that not only was she late, but she hadn't received any news, and then asked how he should punish her for this. His green eye gleamed mischievously as he, trying not to reveal his intentions, said what he had thought of and asked her to come over. Although Dolly grew up in this house with this boy, their situation was always very different. The housekeeper had told her this very clearly just a couple of minutes ago, so she knew her place. Having answered that she obeyed, our heroine walked slowly. Her gaze was calm. She had long been accustomed to keeping her emotions in check. The room was so quiet that she could hear the clock on the table ticking, and she could smell the faint scent of yesterday's flowers in the air. Vincent, watching her, felt a slight confusion, because time seemed to have stopped for both of them. A special silence reigned, which was not simply the absence of sound, but rather a kind of pause in which anything could happen. Finally, his voice broke the silence as Vincent asked that she should know what it meant. He tried his best not to reveal himself, his fingers clenching tensely and his breathing drawn in. Our heroine had to bend down a little more to get a better look at his fist. At that moment, confetti rained down on her from his palm, bright and playful, like a moment filled with surprise. He was clearly pleased with the effect produced. A wide smile spread across his face and his eyes sparkled with pleasure. Excitement and pride in his cunning were evident in his every movement, as if he had just won a small battle. His posture relaxed, and he watched her reaction with satisfaction, as if he had reached the pinnacle of some important moment. And he said that he managed to fool her again, although he still had some work to do, and she praised him because he was so talented. He spoke again, saying that it was a shame. He was rarely as confident in himself as he was now, and asked her to help him get it out of there. Fulfilling his request, Dolly asked him not to be discouraged, because with a little practice he would certainly succeed. This made Vincent laugh again, because he managed to fool her again, although she should have gotten used to his antics by now. Having taken out a very funny spider, he boasted that he did it all himself, and it turned out quite cute. Having said that it made her heart happy to see him so cheerful, Dolly asked how he had been doing lately. The answer was that he had recently changed his pharmacist and the new medicine was very effective. A young lady burst into the room and loudly asked her brother Vincent to evaluate her new ball gown. But her mood changed dramatically when she saw that in addition to her brother, there was also Dolly in the room. The young master reminded Arya's sister that the day of her debut was approaching, and she was still so unceremonious. The young lady responded capriciously that her brother was again treating her like a child, and added that she no longer spoke to him. Then, turning to Dolly, she asked how the dress was, to which our heroine replied that it was simply wonderful, just made for Lady Arya. When Arya boasted that it was from Moses' boutique, Dolly realized why it immediately seemed familiar to her. In the same cheerful manner, the young lady suggested that Dolly, too, should try wearing something brighter in her free time. When she asked her brother for support, Vincent replied that they would definitely buy one for Dolly later. Ava came in and reminded the young gentleman that it was time to take his medicine, and the young lady took advantage of this to take our heroine away. She chattered carefreely about how she had a lot of jewelry with her and really needed help choosing. She asked to look at the necklace because Vincent bought it especially for her, and the set also includes earrings. Dolly was barely listening to her speech anymore, and she didn't care that the jewelry box was about to burst. She was waiting for this performance to finally end, and for everything to return to normal and be like before. She didn't have to wait long. As soon as they moved a little further, Lady Arya sniffed and asked with disgust where such a stench was coming from. Looking sarcastically at her companion, she continued, "How is it that she doesn't feel him? Because it's so obvious." Our heroine knew perfectly well what Arya was getting at. It was so in her spirit. It had been so before, and it would continue to be so. Lady Arya, meanwhile, continued to pester our heroine, saying that the smell of poverty was making her sick. She switched the conversation to Vincent, because he was so poor, he was forced to leave such a smelly thing in the Count's estate. Dolly responded by asking that it be kept in mind that she had just returned to the estate from the Duke of Bolton's residence. And if there is some kind of smell, then it definitely comes from there. Does this mean that the source of the smell of poverty in question is this duchy? Our heroine simply expressed her opinion regarding my lady's words and immediately received retribution for her willfulness. Arya then yelled at her, how dare she talk to her like that? After all, she was the daughter of Viscount Winslow, the future Countess of Lopez. But this didn't surprise Dolly. She was simply tired of these countless reproaches, hypocritical grimacing and shameless rudeness. Meanwhile, the young lady continued to shout that Dolly was just a servant who had escaped from the filth, a beggar, and a disgusting illegitimate daughter. 10 years ago, she was brought to this house because her mother, the maid, expressed the hope that she would be treated properly. As a member of the Lopez family, Dolly looked at the Count and Countess and remembered her mother's words that they would be her new family. She wanted to cry, but she couldn't, because her mother wanted her to remain a smiling child. She wondered if she obeyed and behaved well, her new family would love her, and if she would finally be able to eat her fill. She might no longer have to sleep outside and be bitten by rats, which she had become almost accustomed to lately. But the memory of them would stay with her forever, so she promised herself that she would do everything in her power to live happily in her new home. However, hearing since when the mudbloods started dreaming and talking about justice, I thought that it seems nothing will work out again. The Countess said that it was a simple accident that the gentleman was drunk and she should be grateful that she was not beaten into the doorway. And justice is just a justification for powerless and insignificant servants who want to make money and take everything into their own hands. Dolly replied that her mother was not like that at all, and that she had once told her that the commoner hero Hart Bolton stood guard over the Empire's greatness. Therefore, it is believed that nobles should be more lenient towards those in need, and her mother only wanted the best for her. The dying woman's words came to mind, asking her daughter to continue living and to live with dignity so that she could one day find her happiness. But the moment Dolly looked at the Countess's little head, the thought crept in that she was not at all welcome here. Even many years later, our heroine will remember the expression on her face when Milady said that she was a bastard who did not know the rules. These words sounded cold and merciless, like an icy wind piercing the very heart. The Countess continued that how dare she come and with such pomposity demand a good life at someone else's expense. If it weren't for the Lopez family, orphans like her would definitely have suffered the same fate as that poor maid, dying under a fence. But our heroine could not die. She could not let down her mother, who loved her so much. She begged them to forgive her, promised that she would work, sweep, wash, and do whatever they wanted. Dolly wanted to stay here so much to be closer to her mother's peace that she was really ready to do anything. What else could she do, after all? She was an orphan who had recently lost her mother, and these people were her only hope for the future. That day, her half-brother Vincent, who at that time was a little older than she, saw her for the first time. The Count's family, with a heavy heart, still left her in the house, but they had their own, not-so-moral reasons for doing so. However, this was enough for our young heroine. Now she had a roof over her head and always a very filling lunch. She worked from early morning, and in order not to lose heart, she often hummed funny children's songs under her breath. I want to eat a carrot, but the mother rabbit replied that there were no carrots at home, only sweet potatoes. What should I do? The mother rabbit knows that the baby rabbit hates sweet potatoes the most because, although they are sweet, they are sticky and they have smelly farts. A week later, she had already completely settled into the Count's estate, and although she had to work a lot every day, she had a home. When she remembered that her mother once worked here, she was filled with energy because she dreamed of becoming the best maid. These thoughts lifted her spirits, and she thought that she needed to finish the laundry quickly and also sweep the attic. I promised myself to clean up today until it shines, to try to impress the nurse Eva. This is what our heroine was thinking when her attention was drawn to a rabbit running past, and she couldn't help but be distracted from her washing. He was so cute, and his ears twitched like antennae. Dolly thought he must be lost. This fluffy cutie was definitely a domestic cat, and if so, she decided she needed to help him find his owner. And as soon as she took him in her arms, a terrible scream was heard, telling her to let go immediately and never touch Buzzy again. The girl looked at Dolly with a withering gaze, and she had no choice but to apologize because she thought that the rabbit was lost. And then I thought that she must be a noble lady, with such silky hair and a beautiful dress. Just like the doll she once saw behind the window of a toy store, in general, it made the same impression. Dolly couldn't tear her admiring gaze away, but then the girl spoke again and said that she knew her. After all, she is the same new servant at Count Lopez's estate, the dirty, stinking, illegitimate daughter that her father told her about. Not understanding why they were talking about her like that, Dolly replied that she couldn't be dirty because she washed every day. In response, I heard that Dad told the young lady that beggars who crawled out of the mud will never wash themselves clean. Our heroine thought that none of this mattered. She was not dirty and did not smell at all, and her mother told her that she was a neat girl. The young lady added sarcastically that her rabbit should not come near her, otherwise he would stink of the same thing as this servant. Perhaps something else would have been said, but then a boy appeared, interrupted, and asked what they were doing there. To his question, the young lady replied that Buzzy had gotten himself into some kind of mess, and she was just helping him clean it up. Vincent was not satisfied with this answer, so he said that Aria had acted very rudely and asked her to apologize immediately. She replied that she had done nothing wrong, and that her dad had said that it was dirtying everything around here, and that was why everyone was laughing at the Lopez family. This saddened Dolly, because it turns out that her existence is a shame for others, but she did nothing of the sort. Vincent, meanwhile, continued to scold Aria, saying that this only concerned their family and had nothing to do with her. Having capriciously informed him that he was bad and that she would not speak to him anymore, the young lady left with her maids. Vincent, without addressing anyone in particular, stated that this girl was still the same, losing her temper at the drop of a hat as soon as something didn't go her way. Here, Dolly thought that he had just defended her, and then she noticed his resemblance to the Count, and that he had the same eyes as hers. When he cheerfully asked if she was okay, Dolly answered in the affirmative and thanked him for helping her. In response, he also apologized for Aria and explained that she was the only adored daughter of Viscount Winslow, and therefore a little spoiled. He also said that there was no need for her to be so formal with him, and, confused, she replied that it was necessary because he was a young gentleman. He was surprised at how she knew him. Then Dolly explained that it was not difficult to guess, because he looked so much like the Count. His praise for her being so smart made her blush, because no one else but her mother had ever praised her. Before she had time to come to her senses, Vincent asked her to look at his fist, in which something was clearly hidden. Dolly came a little closer to him to take a closer look, and at that moment there was a barely audible pop. Confetti began to fall from his palm, and he said that he had screwed up again, adding that it was actually quite difficult. She noticed how Vincent himself became a little upset when he said that he constantly practiced such tricks. And only then did it dawn on her that this was a common trick that the young gentleman probably wanted to show off. So she clapped her hands uncertainly, and then Vincent said that there was no point in saving the remains of his dignity. Suddenly his mood changed, and with a sly look in his eyes, he asked if she knew why their eyes were so similar. He explained his thought by saying that their eyes were the same color, and answered his own question, "This is because they are brother and sister." Dolly said that the nurse Eva said that she could only be a maid on the estate, and that she shouldn't dream of anything else. However, I wondered if he really said brother and sister, and was ready to accept the one who was not recognized by other family members. Our heroine asked the gentleman in an uncertain tone, and fell silent, not understanding why he was turning his head in all directions. Vincent, in a conspiratorial tone, asked how about calling him brother when they were alone. Then he asked even more quietly that right now there was no one nearby and maybe she would try. She had no relatives in the whole wide world, and such an offer to find a little brother was a real gift. She called him little brother in an uncertain tone, to which he, delighted, immediately replied that it was, of course, him. For Dolly, he was the most amazing person, like a prince about to save his princess. Along the way, he gave her a fruit called mercy, and its taste was so sweet that she could not tear herself away. That day, her brother protected her, and she promised that when the day came and he needed her help, she would definitely protect him. As the days went by, our heroine was increasingly trusted with various tasks, and she was delighted when she was able to make tea herself. She prepared it in a magnificent tea set, and she was very eager for her brother to try it first. As she hurried down the hallway, she sincerely hoped that Vincent would like it and praise her again. Stopping at the door, our heroine wondered if his lesson was over. Maybe she had arrived early. A strange sound was heard from the room. Dolly couldn't immediately determine what it was, so she looked through the keyhole. What she saw horrified her. Everything was covered in blood, and her first thought was that this had to be stopped immediately. However, the nurse Eve said that servants should never interfere in the master's affairs without permission. Dolly froze. Hesitant, perhaps it would be better if she pretended she hadn't seen anything at all. Remembering Vincent's face, she began to be torn by conflicting feelings. She realized the risks and understood that she could simply be thrown out. But at the same time, she also knew that she would not be able to put up with such cruelty, and she simply had to protect him. She was going to save her brother, so she knocked on the door decisively and said that she apologized to the Count for disturbing her. She added even louder that she had brought hot tea. Her voice was impossible not to hear and recognize. Vincent was seriously scared for her, because judging by the way his father walked towards the door, he was very angry. He wanted to shout for her to run away, but his voice did not obey him, and he could not help Dolly in any way at that moment. All shaking with fear, our heroine, stuttering, began to say that she had brought them freshly brewed tea. Her voice was barely audible when she managed to say what she had intended, that the family never did that. She herself was horrified that she had the courage to do this. After all, she had just made a remark to the Count, and she prepared herself for the inevitable, because when he raised his hand, her only thought was that he was about to hit her, especially considering what she had seen while peeking through the keyhole a few moments earlier. Imagine her surprise when she felt him stroke her and then say that her courage reminded her of that woman. Confused, our heroine stood in the corridor, looking after the Count, and tried to understand why this had happened. When she first tried on a maid's costume, Eva said that one should not interfere in the affairs of the masters and should not question their decisions. A personal maid is nothing more than a tool whose life is worth nothing in the eyes of the master she serves. But now she not only stopped the Count, but also scolded him, and she was not punished for it in any way. Dolly wondered if this meant that she was someone special to the gentleman, even though she didn't know it. But even if she is punished later, she will not regret her words. Her brother's question distracted her from her thoughts. She is fine. Her father did not hit her. Having said that the Count had only stroked her head and left, she added that enough talk, she would do better to bandage his hand. When she asked why the gentleman was so cruel, Vincent replied that it was his punishment for not having mastered the subject perfectly. And that father says that his grandfather raised him in the same way, to which Dolly replied that this is no reason to treat his son in the same way. She couldn't understand why they continued to hurt each other, because they were family. She said out loud that her mother believed that in a real family, people love, care, and also support you in difficult times. When she finished saying that coldness and cruelty had no place here, she upset Vincent, but at the same time he was touched. That's why he asked her not to cry. He was, of course, flattered that she was worried about him, and he had never asked for anything before. After a few seconds of silence, he continued, saying that he now realized that his cherished dream of having a family had finally come true. And he looked into a pair of eyes exactly like his own. Now he had Dolly, his beloved little sister. From that day on, they became a real family, helping and supporting each other, and this is her most precious memory. No matter how hard it was for our heroine from day to day, she seemed to blossom next to her little brother. A few days later, he answered her question by saying that he was taking her to a very good performance. She was curious where he was taking her, whether he wanted to demonstrate some new trick that he had managed to master. But Vincent insisted that there was no need to ask so many questions, because soon she would be able to see everything with her own eyes. Not wanting to spoil the surprise, he eventually led her to a secluded corner of the garden where she had never been before. He did everything in a state of extraordinary secrecy, so she succumbed to this mood and also hid. However, she felt awkward when he hugged her tightly, so she asked why they sat so close. Vincent explained this by saying that they needed to remain unnoticed, otherwise they would miss the most interesting part. She thought it was a little strange. It was a remote corner of the garden, and who could have noticed them here anyway? But she didn't argue. He hugged her even tighter and they waited, soon hearing hurried footsteps. Dolly was surprised when she saw that it was Lady Arya. She wondered what she was doing there. At that moment, Arya asked, "Where are you, Brother Vincent?" then added that she had already arrived as she promised. Looking around, the young lady noticed Buzzy's ribbon, and since she was surprised by this fact out loud, Dolly heard. "I even had time to think that this was the name of Arya's little animal, and I wanted to stick my head out a little to take a closer look." But a moment later, she deeply regretted her decision, and she even closed her eyes tightly so as not to see it. And she opened it almost immediately, because the young lady's piercing screams could not leave her indifferent. She continued to scream, without stopping for a second, and the out-of-breath maids quickly came running to her scream. At that moment, Dolly thought how cruel it was, and no matter how she felt about Arya, she felt genuinely sorry for the girl. This led her to wonder if this was the very performance her brother had told her about. She didn't want to believe this guess. She quietly said that it was a trap, but he didn't let her finish, asking if it really was funny. Dolly saw Lady Arya's face and she thought it was funny. On the contrary, such cruelty must be abnormal. She looked at Vincent and tried to understand why, in such a situation, her brother was still smiling. Unable to bear it any longer, she asked him if he had done it, and was told that she had been bullied because the rabbit had been allowed to run about wherever it pleased. Completely sensing her mood, he continued that he had simply set a trap, and that capricious Arya was to blame for everything else. Our heroine felt her heart breaking with pain, because Buzzy himself had done nothing wrong. The brother she admired was like a prince from a fairy tale. He was brave, kind, and considerate of others. However, such a brother made her experience completely different feelings, and, thinking about this, she instinctively pulled away. When he said he wanted to avenge her, Dolly admitted that having a brother who had done something similar frightened her. Vincent didn't look at his actions from that angle, because he just wanted to please his little sister, and he felt ashamed. After apologizing to her, he explained his behavior, adding that he was to blame because he did not think about her feelings and crossed all boundaries. He seemed completely sincere when he said that he also apologized to Arya and asked her once again to forgive him. She thought that he wanted to please her and perhaps this method was wrong, but her brother accidentally crossed that very line. After all, her brother is affectionate and handsome like a prince, so Dolly said that she forgives, but hopes that this will not happen again. And no matter what happened, he would never do something like that again, Vincent promised, and even offered to seal this promise with his little fingers. Believing that he had done it by accident, Dolly felt a warm wave of relief wash over her heart. Inside, she knew that even in the most difficult situations, they would always be able to protect each other and get through everything together. The nurse Ava asked our heroine in a stern tone to make tea, and then they took it to Mr. Vincent. The brother watched this scene, and as always when he saw Dolly, his heart was filled with warmth and tenderness. At that moment, he clearly realized that for him, she was the most important person in the world, and for the sake of her smile, he was ready to do anything. His attentive gaze did not hide the redness on her cheek, and he quickly guessed who was to blame for this. He was upset, because he had hoped that over the years this situation would smooth out, and he would not have to worry about it anymore. However, the fact remained a fact, and, unfortunately, nothing changed. A wave of anger slowly rose in his heart. It was at that moment that Arya came in and said carelessly that he rarely came to see her in the mornings, although she was glad to see him. Anger was still seething within him, which was reflected in his tone when he asked if it was she who had hit Dolly yesterday. Arya didn't expect this question, but countered that this mudblood had already managed to complain to him. And although Vincent tried to calm her down, she continued defiantly, "And so what if she hit her?" Then she added that she knows, and her brother Vincent asked her to be gentler with Dolly, but it is very difficult for her. Does he know how they gossip about this girl at tea parties, and what it's like for her, the Viscount's daughter, to hang out with this illegitimate daughter? She asked if he understood the pressure she was under, since she was initially doomed to gossip because of his position. Then she continued that he should pay more attention to her because she was his fiancée and also the future Countess Lopez, adding at the end that it was time for him to stop hanging out with this beggar, but he already knew that to some extent she was right. This is what he told her, adding that she was indeed his fiancée and he should put her first. Glad that the incident was settled, Arya said that she would take him at his word, and after they got married, they would throw this girl out. Or better yet, they will marry her off, and it will be very generous to marry Dolly off to some low-ranking knight. Then she asked if he agreed with this proposal, and having answered that it was fine, asked her not to get angry over trifles anymore. And he expressed hope that the future Countess Lopez would be the happiest June bride. As if by chance, Lady Aria replied that she had almost forgotten, but perhaps the wedding would have to be postponed again. To his surprised exclamation about what had happened, she replied that it was not because Dad was hesitant about the Managa mine. At that moment, her father, Viscount Winslow, a vassal of the Lopez family, appeared and asked if his daughter was not happy about her daddy's arrival. He added with a laugh that, of course, she would soon get married and have a husband and would completely forget about her father. Aria replied that no, but asked that the next time he was going to come, he should warn her and she would meet him. And this would save him from meeting with the vile trash, and the Viscount asked if they were talking about the Managa mine. His daughter took up this conversation, saying that everything was correct, because this mine was promised as her dowry. He replied that he remembered everything, but thought that his innocent daughter, with such a rich dowry, would be deceived by someone with bad intentions. Vincent said that Uncle Winslow was right, that the mine was now the main source of income and caution was justified, and that, when he suggested something like this before, he simply believed that Aria deserved the best and was to blame for not thinking it through properly. The Viscount replied that when his nephew became engaged to Aria, he became half his son, and he took over the management of the mine. Just to lighten the load, because Vincent is still a child, and how can he manage such a large fortune? But Dolly knew that the Viscount was only a vassal of the Lopez family, and while her parents were alive, her brother had never been so kind to him. But after the incident, the Viscount burst into the house uninvited, took control of all affairs, and also forced Vincent to get engaged to Aria. All this led to the estate beginning to fall into disrepair, and he also took away the mine that the family had worked on for several generations. The Viscount continued that, considering his painstaking work in raising his nephew, would he really repay his goodness with evil? Dolly wondered if Winslow suspected his brother of something, and that it was only until the wedding that all property rights would return to Vincent. She didn't quite understand what exactly was happening, and her brother started saying that he had always appreciated him, but he didn't have time to finish. Our heroine screamed loudly, and the Viscount asked since when the servants at the estate had forgotten how to hold a tray with tea. He advised his nephew to raise such mediocrities more strictly, since the Lopez family must not be allowed to lose face. This rather ugly prank of the Viscount caused wild joy in his beloved daughter, while Vincent sat with a stony face. The Viscount's voice brought her out of her stupor. He ordered her to quickly clean up the place and prepare fresh tea. Winslow ended his speech by saying that servants should behave like servants, which provoked Vincent's barely restrained anger. He saw that his little sister's hands were hurt, and it hurt him to look at her, but for now he could do nothing. The Viscount, pleased with himself, said that it was not bad, that this was exactly the spirit that the heir to the earldom should have, and now he was calm. Lady Aria took this as a sign of consent, and he confirmed that she would marry and have the best dowry. A generous dowry, a luxurious ballroom, congratulations and envious glances, and she will be the most beautiful June bride. Without hiding her joy, she threw herself into her father's arms. He even had to remind her that he had a cigar in his hands. This remark only made Aria laugh. She continued to hug her father and added that her brother was also waiting for this. That he, too, was eagerly awaiting their wedding day and had no choice but to overcome his internal resistance. Vincent put a benevolent smile on his face and replied that, of course, he dreamed of that day coming as soon as possible. No one even noticed how our heroine, barely holding back tears of pain, quietly left the room. Going down to the kitchen, she was able to replay the recent events in her head once again and come to disappointing conclusions. She was well aware that it was not in her power to help her little brother, unfortunately. All the circumstances were not in their favor right now. When he appeared in the kitchen, she was very surprised why he had come down here and could not resist asking about it. After hearing his explanation that they had left and he had come to check on her hand, she said it was fine. And it's not a big deal at all. He'll apply the ointment and everything will go away tomorrow, so he shouldn't worry about it so much. Having said that it was fine, Vincent explained that he was just pretending. In fact, as before, he never considered her a servant. He knows she understands him, but he wonders why she continues to call him sir. He continued that even now, when they were alone, our heroine said very quietly in an uncertain tone, "Brother." But even this was enough for him. His face brightened, and smiling, he asked her to wait a little longer. He asked her to wait until everything was over, and her brother would eventually inherit the county, and then they would become a real family again. He promised that they could be together forever, but she didn't want to hurt him with her answer that she would definitely leave here. Our heroine could not tell him that it would be much better for them if she left the estate. After all, be that as it may, an illegitimate daughter is the dirtiest stain on his family tree, and nothing can be done about it. He begged her not to leave, because she promised him that she would always be there, so she simply could not leave him. Dolly spoke well, but her decision had already been made, and she believed that if she left, it would be better for both of them. Meanwhile, at the Bolton residence, our hero entertained himself as best he could, trying to occupy himself with routine work so as not to think about her. But whatever he took on, everything seemed to him terribly boring. Life without Dolly seemed unbearable to him. Even the most ordinary tasks became a painful ordeal, and he couldn't shake the feeling that his world was empty without her smile and warmth. Finally, he figured out how to get out of the situation and decided to use his imagination to the fullest. He imagined her calmly cleaning, carefully putting things in their places, trying to do everything perfectly. Then his imagination took him back to their date in the garden, where they walked slowly through the shade of the trees. He could not forget their trip to the city, when they wandered through the streets, discovering something new and making every moment special. These were such sweet memories that he was completely upset and was ready to do anything reckless, just so that she would return sooner. He counted the minutes and seconds until her return, but time seemed, as luck would have it, to stop, turning into an eternity. Our heroine was returning to the duchy, and at some point she thought she was tired. The carriage ride took only 2 hours, and she had to walk most of the way, hoping that she would be able to reach the estate before dark. Before leaving, she decided that she shouldn't tell her brother about the situation with the Duke, so as not to worry him unnecessarily. Vincent asked her to let her know if she had any difficulties in the duchy, and reminded her that her term of service would soon end. And when this happens, she can return to the county. He orders a room to be prepared for her. In response, she thanked him. The atmosphere was already a bit tense, and then a young lady appeared and asked if Vincent remembered that he had promised to have breakfast with her. Having apologized, he replied that he would walk Dolly home and would come over later, and then Arya wished her a good journey. She even asked me to be careful, and then, changing her tone, added that it somehow looked strange. She asked that it seemed Dolly was going to get into a special carriage from the county. Why would that be, since she was not Lady Lopez? Afterwards, turning to her brother Vincent for support, she asked if she was right, and he reluctantly agreed. But Dolly didn't care. She decided that she wouldn't bother him anymore. He already made too many concessions for her sake. The plan was quite simple. Her brother would marry, she would finish her work in the duchy, save up some money, and this place would no longer be her refuge. She will leave here alone and go north, where no one knows her, and start life with a clean slate. Remembering that her brother had asked the wet nurse to pack her some food for the journey, she decided it was time for a snack. Ava put some sweet potatoes in her bowl, and our heroine thought how lucky, since she had eaten almost nothing since leaving the duchy. However, she still found it funny that she had been eating potatoes for several days in a row. The sweet potato tasted sweet, and Dolly wondered if she would be able to taste it when she went north. Would she ever go through such an experience again? She suddenly remembered the Duke's face when he burned himself with a hot sweet potato. This memory made her smile, and she wondered why she remembered him, whether she had become so attached. How could she become attached to this incomprehensible Duke, who, for no apparent reason, showed such ardent love for her? Dolly thought it was time to come back down to earth, because it was clear as day that this was just a game that would lead to nothing. Perhaps the Duke would have cooled down by the time she returned, and she could dismiss these memories as just a dream. She was distracted from her thoughts by a man who said that he couldn't believe he had met such a charming young lady. She knew that bandits did not dare to rob nobles' carriages, but were always happy to attack ordinary travelers. Without listening to his reassuring words, she thought that she was quite good at running, but only over short distances. She still can't compare to a man in strength, so it's better to run, mentally counting on the fact that he's alone. Realizing that she had to try to break away first, Dolly ran as fast as she could, leaving his screams behind. However, her calculation turned out to be wrong because there were two men, and the second was apparently waiting for her, hiding in the bushes. Ignoring his question about why she was running away without saying a word, she frantically assessed the situation. There was no way she could allow them to capture her in such a deserted place, so she decided to defend herself. Her heart was beating fast. She had to act quickly because she knew that every second was important in this situation. Her maneuver with the suitcase temporarily knocked out one of the attackers, and she rushed into the forest, accompanied by his obscene curses. Judging by the screams, they had decided to catch her at any cost, and she understood that this could not be allowed to happen. And she ran even faster, and she heard the sound of trampling behind her, and then she thought that there were too many trees around. She won't be able to break the distance, and if this continues, sooner or later she will simply run out of strength. And if the second one comes to his senses and also chases after her, then they will surround her and then her song will be sung. She knew that this time no one would come to save her, and she could only rely on her own strength. She remembered Vincent and thought with sadness that her brother would certainly not come to her aid, and would it really end like this? She still managed to keep her distance, but how long could she hold out and suddenly remembered the Duke? She even mentally cursed herself for how long she would continue to console herself with fruitless hopes. She told herself that she knew that the Duke's kindness was nothing more than a noble amusement, and that those confessions, that love, were all lies. You can't lose your head over being treated too well when you don't deserve it. She had no right to love any of them. While our heroine continued her obstacle course, the robber loudly cursed her with all his might. And since he had no desire to run after this girl, he decided to check the contents of her suitcase. The one running after her suddenly lost sight of her and stopping, listened, but did not hear anything like her running. So he decided to change tactics and started shouting out where this cutie was and that he wanted to see her. Dolly thought that she would never give up. Even if no one came to her aid, she had to stand up for herself. She decided that she would wait until he came up, and then, seizing the moment she would hit him on the head, she hoped that she would succeed. But she was so focused on the sounds of approaching footsteps that she didn't hear the slight cry. The man was clearly approaching, and Dolly thought that she needed to time it so that she could knock out this bastard with one blow, and then quickly run out onto the main road. Then she will be saved, and swinging, she hit the log with all her strength. She actually managed to give the man a good whack on the head, only it turned out to be a completely different person. Meanwhile, everything began to swim before the Duke's eyes, and it took him a few moments to regain his sight. And the first thing he saw was Dolly's green eyes, who looked at him with genuine surprise. His head began to ache mercilessly where he had been hit, but he didn't want his lady to think it was bothering him. When she asked why it was him, our hero replied that it was wonderful that she was okay and that he arrived on time. Vran, the butler who had already served 2 Dukes of Bolton, was dizzy from everything that had happened in recent days. He witnessed one Duke working tirelessly from dawn to dusk with virtually no days off, and the other one wasted his life in drunkenness and idleness, but he was not ready for what was happening now. It was the first time Vrana had seen the Duke of Bolton do anything for some maid. Milord tirelessly asked his opinion, either about the chosen costume or whether she would like the surprise he had prepared. I thought that the Duke was really partial to women, but his attitude towards love has changed a lot, and he no longer seems flighty. From an arrogant, willful, idle good-for-nothing who had just inherited the title and moved into the residence. In addition to such an unpredictable nature and the drastic changes after the poisoning, this girl also appeared. Dolly Lopez, the illegitimate daughter of the Count, a simple servant who had worked in the estate for many years, suddenly became the Duke's favorite. The butler's reflections led him to the conclusion that the changes could be connected with her, which meant it was necessary to make inquiries. The Duke asked worriedly why she had not returned yet, and Vrana replied that there had probably been some delay, and that she would probably arrive soon, but my lord decided to go ahead and look around, and ordered the butler to follow him in the carriage. He looked worried as he said he had a bad feeling and hoped he was just overthinking things. Now, after the collision with the log, he felt much better because nothing happened to his beloved Dolly. But she was very worried and kept asking why it was him and asking for forgiveness because she could not imagine that it was him. He reassured her, saying that it was nothing serious, just a small wound, and it was worth it that Dolly was safe. Realizing that the Duke had come specifically to save her and that she had wounded him, our heroine panicked even more than before. She said that if she had pulled herself together and first made sure that she was really being followed by a robber, but instead, it was her fault that the gentleman suffered, and now she will never be able to forgive herself for such a mistake. Our hero calmed her down. He told her that she was not guilty of anything and that she should not blame herself, especially since everything was fine with him. And she is very brave, since she was able to fight back under such circumstances, so she is a real smart girl. Dolly looked at the Duke with wet eyes and thought that she had hurt him, and not only did he not blame her, but he was also so tenderly comforting her. Usually only rare treasures are treated with such care, and this made one doubt that what was happening was a game of love. And it looks more and more like these are his true feelings, but why, having such a high status, is he so kind to her? With her face buried in his shoulder, Dolly wondered why he was making her doubt her decision to leave here one day. All these thoughts made our heroine feel embarrassed, and therefore she pressed herself even closer to him so that he could not see her face. She was immensely grateful to him, and she thanked him for coming to save her. He wanted to hug her and calm her down, but at that moment the butler ran up and asked how the master was. He also asked about the man on the ground, to which the Duke answered in turn that he was fine, but the two scoundrels needed to be delivered to the duchy. Vrana replied that he would do everything, but the gentleman also needed to return quickly and immediately call a doctor. But his lordship had no time for the doctor. He wanted to give his lady the bouquet he had prepared, but by mistake he began to hand her his hair. His efforts caused the wound on his head to open and blood to gush out, so the butler quickly reported where exactly the carriage was. But it was not so easy to convince the Duke that he needed medical help and that the bouquet had apparently been lost. The doctor declared that the wound was not serious, but he had been hit with something heavy, so the gentleman's condition would need to be monitored for a while. He said that the Duke would probably feel a little dizzy, so he advised moving less and lying down more. Dolly wanted to ask him to listen to the doctor's advice, but before she could get a word in, he protested, saying that it didn't hurt. She found it suspicious that he wasn't in pain, since the Duke had once screamed in pain from a small burn. Vrana said that he would ask his personal maid to take care of the gentleman, but he flatly refused, saying that it was too much trouble. However, the servant insisted, because someone had to take care of the Duke, but he again refused, sharply adding that the butler was a big talker. Then Dolly offered her services, explaining that she had experience caring for the sick and could handle the job, adding that the Duke was injured due to her fault, so she was obliged to take this responsibility upon herself. The Duke again objected, citing the fact that she herself needed to recover from the shock she had experienced. Dolly replied that she was fine and would make sure he was fed, changed, and washed on time. Our hero especially liked the last sentence, and to make sure no one changed his mind, he quickly plopped down on the bed. To make it more convincing, he began to complain that his head was spinning, and Dolly said with concern that it was nothing surprising. The butler thought it was absurd that a maid in charge of cleaning could know how to care for an ailing aristocrat. And the maid gave instructions that Vrana and the doctor, if it was not too much trouble, should come regularly to change the bandages. She added that the butler should make sure that the other servants kept quiet, and that they brought him food 3 times a day directly to his room. The Duke was eager to hear what instructions he would be given, and she said she wanted him to take care of himself and get more rest. Having received attention, he blossomed, because in this situation no one would interfere with his and Dolly's idol. The doctor whispered a question, "Who is this noble lady who is acting so decisively? Could this really be the future Duchess?" However, the butler did not answer this question. He himself was a little shocked, because the Duke obeyed her unquestioningly. Dolly began her duties and first asked the victim to change his suit into a dressing gown. But here the Duke balked, because he had spent so long choosing this outfit so that she would like it, and she had not even appreciated it yet. He started asking flirtatiously how he looked, to which Dolly replied that he was beautiful, but it would still be better for him to rest. And she advised him to take off his clothes and quickly, and since he was in no hurry, she did it herself. At that moment, she heard the Duke comment that he had not expected her to rip his clothes off in one fell swoop. After his next phrase, our heroine froze with his robe in her hands because she did not expect such a turn of events. Looking at her with the most languid gaze he was capable of, the Duke asked if Dolly really wanted to see him like this. She blushed to her ears when our hero added that he could never have imagined that his lady was such a slut. Feeling the awkwardness of the situation, she tried to get out of it by saying that she just wanted him to be able to rest properly. But he still made her quite nervous. Her movements became awkward, and stepping on the robe, she fell. Her expectations that it would hurt now, as usually happens when falling, were not met. On the contrary. It was soft and warm. When I opened my eyes, I realized why this had happened, and I was so scared that my heart almost jumped out of my chest. Jumping up as if scalded, she quickly apologized and added that it was an accident and she was very sorry. However, she was the only one who was scared. Our hero found this somersault very timely and desirable. He told her that no matter what happened, it was okay, and as long as it was her, he was all for it. He began to pull her towards him. Trying to get out of his strong but gentle embrace, our heroine asked what only for meant. Her heart was pounding so hard that she became completely nervous, losing her will to resist, and asked him to stop teasing her. At that moment, he began to tell her tenderly that when he saw that bandit rummaging through her suitcase, he became scared. And having learned that his accomplice had run after her into the forest, he did not stop praying and looking for her for a second. His voice became a little muffled with desire, but he continued, if even one hair fell from her head, he would. He didn't tell her what he had done. He knew it would be better if she never knew what might have happened. Instead, he said that fortunately she was safe and sound, and Dolly felt that the Duke was genuinely concerned about her. His caresses and touches became more and more insistent, and it became increasingly difficult for her to remain calm and clear-headed. Inside, she struggled with the growing anxiety, knowing she needed to find a way to get out of this situation and maintain control. She had no idea what to do with such happiness. She wanted to enjoy this incredible feeling without thinking about anything else. And just at that moment, the butler knocked and announced that it was time for dinner. Dolly jumped up and said that she would bring it. The Duke was ready to burst into tears because of the missed opportunity and then kill Vran so that he wouldn't interfere. Dolly, already at the door, said that there were still 3 days left until their agreement, and she asked him to devote this time to taking care of his health. Ignoring the advice to take care of himself, Andres heard only what he wanted. She had not forgotten her promise. She thought, when did she become so brave? She can no longer be distracted. She must work hard. She thanked the butler for his work, and he thought that it had just been quite noisy in that room, saying out loud that it was his duty. Dolly was now responsible for the Duke's health, and therefore approached the matter with the utmost seriousness. Seeing additional utensils on the tray, our heroine decided that she should first try the prepared dishes. Vrana believed that this girl would take advantage of the Duke's favor for her own whims. However, now it seemed to him that she was more conscious than he had previously assumed. Having said that everything was fine with the food, she added that she would take it to the gentleman and later ask him to send someone to clean up. Without realizing it, Vrana was very pleased with her work, and it clearly exceeded all his expectations, and he decided to watch it some more. Our heroine thought that this was her job, so she would try, and she was sure that with her help he would quickly recover. After some time, while shoving a spoon into his mouth, she said that he needed to eat vegetables so that his diet would be balanced. She asked him not to fidget, as it would be bad if the wound got wet, and the Duke was worried that his dreams of bathing together were dashed. She told him that he was wounded and needed a good rest, so she would sleep in the next room and she would not lie next to him. The other maids praised Dolly because she was so good at looking after her master alone. That she does everything perfectly, even better than all those maids, and the manager doesn't even know what to find fault with. Having answered that it was an easy job, our heroine heard the question. She, the insignificant, low-ranking servant, had become completely arrogant. One of the maids asked if she had forgotten her place, and the maids whispered to Dolly that these were high-ranking maids. Our heroine had not encountered them before this moment, but she knew that, just as in the nobility, so in the estate there was a strict hierarchy. Before the Duke married the Duchess, Vran's butler was in charge of all the servants at the Bolton residence. Gradually, the staff of servants increased, and high-ranking maids and valets appeared in the house. Most of them are young members of the Bolton feudal aristocracy, and are therefore of noble birth. And the most numerous layer is made up of simple servants. They come from impoverished noble families or the children of wealthy merchants. Since personal servants are always close to the master, many vassal families send their children of the appropriate age to the estate. In other words, these high-ranking maids, being aristocrats, were also candidates for the title of future duchess. And then one of them said, they say, someone here forgot about his status, and does Dolly really think that the Duke takes this seriously? The maid, Layla, calling her a dreamer, added that the master was simply looking for new sensations, and she was still clinging to him. Dolly replied that she was just doing her job, especially since the Duke had personally given his approval. Hannah said sarcastically that they should treat Dolly with more respect since she had been working in the house longer than they had. However, the Duke still has a noble title, so from tomorrow they will take care of him, and she is sure that he would want the same. Our heroine sharply replied that no, she had promised the gentleman that she would put his feet up and would definitely keep her promise. Having started speaking, she realized that there was no turning back now, so she continued that this was her area of responsibility. And without even realizing where she had gotten such courage, she blurted out that she was now also the Duke's lover. Feeling the support of her friends, she added that she wanted to take care of him and would not tolerate interference. Layla replied that she was simply impenetrable, because everyone knew that he suffered because of her. The servant who accompanied Vran told them everything. The Duke dealt with 2 bandits, and Dolly mistook him for one of them and hit him, and it turns out that she deliberately harmed the gentleman. In response, Dolly said that she was nervous at that moment and did not recognize the Duke when he came close to her. She thought to herself that the Duke had already dealt with the 2 bandits. In other words, he was already safe before he found her. Then why didn't he just call out to her? Then she wouldn't have hit him, and from what he said it's clear that he knew there were 2 bandits. Reflecting further, she had the strong impression that the Duke had deliberately exposed himself to her attack. The third maid, named Caroline, said that Dolly was a wily snake and reminded her to remember her place. Layla didn't let up, saying that the girl had too much of an opinion of herself and that Lady Caroline was still the most suitable candidate for the Duke. Then Caroline added that the Duke himself would soon understand that it was unwise to keep people around him with whom he couldn't even go out in society. A friend advised Dolly not to fall for rude provocations and to tell the Duke everything, that he had punished them for her. But our heroine believed that it was not worth bothering the gentleman with such things and asked him not to worry about her. She was not afraid of them. Then she asked where these bandits were now, and the maid said that they were in an underground prison, and one added that the Duke would give them a thrashing. And Dolly replied that the Duke was a nobleman and was unlikely to resort to lynching, and if the bandits were sent to the sheriff, they would still receive a fair trial. One of the would-be criminals complained about how they had managed to attack someone from the Duke's estate, and how they were beaten for no reason. The partner supported him, saying that in any case they would now be sent to the sheriff and then released in a couple of days. He still had a little time left to say that his lordship had no reason to do so. The servants ran through the moonlit garden and along the driveway, but unfortunately there was no trace of the fugitives anywhere. Vrana wondered how this could have happened. Some punks managed to escape from the prison of a famous duchy. They were interrogated, and the attack on Miss Lopez was a simple accident, and who would have saved them anyway? They don't even have anything to their name. Then Vrana quietly repeated the name Dolly Lopez and was horrified by his own guess. And although Andres Bolton was indeed of noble birth, Hart, his ancestor, was a commoner with a dark past. It was not the first time he had taken the law into his own hands, and at times in his distant past he had even received genuine satisfaction from it. The legend hid that within the respected noble family lay not only nobility, but also a darkness of long-buried mysteries. The bandit begged for mercy and claimed that he was innocent, and Hart asked if he knew that this was wrong. And what good is this? Will it atone for the consequences? If an insignificant confession is enough, then what else can justice do here? Hart said that in his several lives he wanted to cherish only one person, but for some reason there are always such eyeless freaks. Listening to the groans and dull blows, Vrana thought, what a horror. It felt like the Duke was even more cruel than he had been a few days ago. Is it all because of Dolly Lopez, sir, like a wild animal who is gradually getting a taste of freedom? Looking at his bloody hands, Hart said sadly that they were dirty, and Dolly so rarely helped him with bathing. Then he asked louder why Vrana was wandering around here instead of enjoying sleep like everyone else. Coming out of the shadows, the butler apologized and reported that 2 bandits had disappeared from the dungeon and the servants were looking for them. The Duke said he hadn't planned it at first, but now he thought how much they had scared Dolly. Then he said that this cannot be said. She has nothing to do with it. There is no point in dragging her into this matter. He needs to think. He offered another version, that he was suddenly attacked by 2 escaped thugs, and everything happened in self-defense. The butler thought the Duke was crazy and heard the order that he needed to find all the information on Count Lopez. Then, to find out why Dolly traveled half the way in a carriage and walked the other half, the Duke wanted to know the real reason. Having replied that it would be done, the butler instinctively shuddered when the Duke stopped next to him. However, this barely noticeable movement did not escape the Duke's keen gaze, and he looked at the servant again. He asked Vran in a half-joking tone. He was so creepy that even his heart sank into his heels. His voice sounded calm, but it was precisely in this calm that all the horror that had so frightened the butler was hidden. He asked the Duke to spare him, and heard in response that it didn't matter, one way or another, but they would all be afraid of him. The Duke said very quietly that only one person, only she, believed in him and knew that he would definitely become a real hero. Her image appeared before his mind's eye, and he could not let her down and he could not allow her to be afraid of him. He promised himself that he would do everything possible to justify her faith and become the man she was waiting for, no matter what. When the butler called out to him, our hero said that he was very tired and that he missed Dolly incredibly. And he wasn't lying, because she was his only hope of not falling into the madness woven from his memories. Only her loyalty and faith could keep him from falling into the dark depths of the past, where his fears and darkness dwelt. In this bright image, she became his salvation, the key to the new beginning that he so desperately sought. Pressing close to her, he inhaled her scent, so sweet and delicate, like the fresh scent of flowers after the rain. At that moment, he felt his heart fill with warmth and peace again, forgetting about all his worries and thoughts. He kissed her lightly, feeling the quiet beating of her heart, and realized that for him there was nothing more important than this closeness. A spark of hope ignited inside him, and he wanted to preserve this moment and cherish it further, no matter what. He wanted to protect her from all the hardships and dangers of this world, and his thoughts again returned to the incident in the forest. He remembered how scared he was when he found out that some bandit was chasing her, how he scolded himself for not going to meet her. He begged the gods who were not kind to him to protect her, otherwise he would never be able to forgive this world. The Duke knew the second robber must be somewhere nearby and slowed his pace a little to listen. Finally, he saw him. He was screaming completely carelessly throughout the forest, trying to lure his victim out of hiding. Acting quickly but quietly, he knocked him to the ground and thought that this must be the bandit's partner. He exhaled because, apparently, he hadn't reached Dolly yet. Now the last threat was eliminated, and all that remained was to find her. Our hero looked around and listened again, but heard nothing but the cheerful chirping of forest birds. Then he began to look more closely in the hope that she had not run too far, and finally discovered her silhouette. Dolly stood in such a pose that it immediately became clear to him that she was prepared to fight back against the bandits. I thought with pride for her that even if he hadn't come, she would have managed everything herself, because she had always been so strong. She always relied only on herself, always strong and independent, never giving in to difficulties. It was precisely for these character traits that he liked her so much. Now all he had to do was find an approach to her heart. Then an idea came to his mind, and he moved towards the place where she was hiding in the hope of testing his theory. He thought that if it didn't work now, he would still have a few backup options that he could use later. There were literally a couple of steps left to her, and he managed to mentally run through the possible options for further events in his head. His calculation turned out to be correct. He really did get a good beating from that club, but Dolly was too upset. The Duke had to make every effort to calm her down and convince her that he had suffered through his own fault, and his words that she was smart had a stunning effect. She began to view her actions in a different light. She believed him that she had acted solely in self-defense and could not have imagined that it would turn out to be the Duke. When Dolly pressed herself against his shoulder and thanked him for coming to save her, his heart fluttered with bliss. He wanted to hug her, but he couldn't, because a feeling of guilt suddenly rose in his soul, because he had done wrong. Everything happened as he had hoped. The eyes that had been full of tears of fear and anxiety a couple of minutes ago dried up, and in an instant they became grateful and tender, and he knew that at that moment he had occupied her entire heart without a trace. In the first second, he flew up with happiness, but a moment later he realized how pathetic his act was. Our hero reproached himself for manipulating her into making her heart beat for him, but the feeling of remorse quickly passed. The next morning arrived, the sun was shining through the window, and our heroine woke up, feeling the soft touch of warmth on her face. Slowly straightening her clouded eyelids, she smiled, taking a deep breath. She felt rested and full of energy. Dolly thought it was time to wake the Duke for breakfast, and suddenly wondered if he might already be awake. Trying to get into her slippers with her bare foot, she realized that she had stepped on something, and this something was soft and warm. The drowsiness vanished in a split second when, lowering her eyes, she discovered the Duke sleeping at the bedside. Dolly involuntarily blushed again, realizing the awkwardness of the situation. She quickly pulled her leg away, but the Duke had already woken up. Silence fell in the room, and his gaze slowly, with a hint of surprise and slight confusion, stared at her. The Duke raised his head as if trying to understand what was happening, and Dolly asked why he was sleeping there. Smiling radiantly, he replied that he missed me in the evening, and that's why he came, but ended up getting too caught up in his staring and apparently just fell asleep. She told him that he should have woken her up. Then, seeing blood on him, she worriedly asked if the wound had really opened. When he replied that it wasn't his, she firmly informed him that he still needed to take a bath and call a doctor. The Duke was clearly in no hurry, so Dolly resorted to trickery, saying that if he took a bath, she would kiss him afterwards. It worked, and she asked the Duke to wait for her in the bathroom. She would bring him clean clothes and call the doctor. Then she scolded him more gently, because he was still wounded, so why wander around at night? Then she asked if something had happened. Slightly evasively answering that everything was fine, he thanked her for her concern and asked her not to worry about him. But she didn't really believe him, because all his clothes were not just dirty, but covered in blood, which meant that something had definitely happened. She was just a servant and had no right to know everything about her master, but now the situation has changed dramatically. Our heroine realized that she wanted to know every last detail about the Duke in order to understand him better. Voices were heard in the corridor that this was against the rules. The Duke was wounded, but had not even rested in his chambers. Layla continued that entrusting a cleaning lady with such an important task as caring for the master was irresponsible. Dolly approached and asked what was going on. Layla, not giving the butler a chance to answer, pounced on him with a question about where she had put the Duke. She calmly replied that he was in the bathroom now and asked him not to make any noise and not to disturb the owner. Layla said that Dolly was still behaving as if nothing had happened and didn't even know that bandits had attacked her owner yesterday. But fortunately, the gentleman is strong and was able to catch them again. The poor Duke finds himself drawn into this matter again and again. Asking how this was possible, Dolly thought that this was why the Duke hadn't told her anything. He was afraid that she would worry. And Caroline said that they did not intend to disobey the master's orders, but one person was not enough to serve the Duke. And it is for this reason that they entered this house as personal servants, so that they will begin their duties. They, the high-class maids, claim their rights to care for his lordship's precious body. After hearing this statement, the butler replied that the Duke had made it clear that he did not need personal maids. Dolly said that she would ask the Duke herself, and that it was okay. The maid's request was reasonable, and it would be fair to let him look after her. Layla's grumpiness was her answer. Why had she suddenly become so accommodating? Apparently she wanted to say something nasty. Looking sideways at Layla, Caroline thought about the rumors that Dolly was the daughter of a servant from Count Lopez's mansion. There was talk among the servants that she was a vulgar person who seduced the Duke with her body, but it seems that this is not true. Our heroine said that it didn't matter whether they believed her or not, but she would convey their request and ask them to let her through. Layla still couldn't calm down and muttered, "Look at the fox who thought so much of herself, and how the devil got the Duke into this." To which Dolly replied that if they wanted to take care of the gentleman, they should be more careful about their behavior in public, adding that otherwise it would affect the other two maids as well. She wondered strangely where Hannah was. Caroline understood that Dolly was absolutely right in this matter, and that they could not speak ill of his lordship. However, she also noticed that Hannah had disappeared somewhere, but don't pay any attention to it. Our hero's bliss in the bathroom was marred by the fact that his lady had not yet returned. When the door creaked, he perked up, wondering if she had finally come and helped him wash up. Imagine his surprise when, instead of Dolly, he saw a completely unfamiliar girl. She introduced herself as Hannah, his personal maid, and added that she would be serving him in the bathhouse today. He looked at her in amazement and thought it was very sweet of her, although I had not expected to meet her in particular. His gaze slid with interest over her drawn silhouette, and he decided that it was worth leaving everything in a light, playful mood. With a slight grin, he said, "So I have a new maid. Well, I hope you will be a great helper." Moments later, Dolly and the other maids watched in amazement as Hannah shot out of the bathhouse. Along the way, she shouted something unintelligible, so no one could understand anything, but her movements suggested haste and excitement. Her whole appearance suggested that something extraordinary or completely unexpected had happened. All Dolly could understand was that the girl was terribly scared and decided to find out what had happened. Hannah, her whole body shaking with fear, repeated the same thing. "What a nightmare, I don't want to. I don't want to. I won't." The only thing our heroine understood was that the Duke, who just entered at that moment, was to blame for everything. Noting that she runs fast, he added that he was joking and there was no need to be so serious, but her sudden appearance had really scared him. Hannah began to lament that she was very sorry, that she should not have entered the bathhouse without permission, and that she would leave the duchy immediately. The Duke repeated that he was joking, but if she really wanted to leave, he would not stop her, but asked her not to be so tactless in the future. Having thanked him, the now former personal maid wandered off to the exit with her head down and her reputation tarnished. However, as soon as she realized that the attention to her had waned, she rushed to run away from that place like a bullet. Having asked that this not happen again, the Duke told Dolly that he had been waiting for her for so long and suggested that they go for a swim. She asked him what he had said, and he replied that he had only told her about such an unauthorized intrusion into the master's house. In the old empire, this was a serious crime and was certainly punished, and there were many different ways. Then he added that any pain leaves a permanent mark on the memory, and to say that it was pure hell is to say nothing. This was said in such a tone that our heroine stopped for a second to take in everything that was said. She even wanted to ask him to explain to her what he meant, but after looking at him, she changed her mind. Changing his expression to a puppy dog one, the Duke said that he didn't mean to scare her, but she just burst in so abruptly that she scared him. Dolly replied that she knew everything. Hannah herself had just admitted it and offered to take him to the bathroom so that he wouldn't catch a cold. He was already prepared to communicate with her, but then he was distracted by other maids who asked for a little time. Having learned who they were, the Duke repeated that he did not need them, but Caroline nevertheless introduced herself as the eldest daughter of the Marquise of Field, adding that they had recently entered the estate as his personal maids and expressed their hope that he would allow them to take care of him. Coming to life, our hero asked Field again if she was really a descendant of that same lout Jed, and Caroline confirmed it. From her history lessons, Dolly knew that Jed was the right hand of the legendary hero Bolton Than, his most trusted general. She also remembered that his noble family was more loyal than anyone else to the Bolton clan. But the Field family almost never married to the Boltons, so why did they suddenly decide to send their eldest daughter here? While she was pondering this, the Duke said that he personally did not need personal maids, but since they were so good-natured, and after a meaningful pause, he continued that in that case they could become Dolly's personal maids. So, unexpectedly, our heroine acquired her own high-ranking maids. In all cases, it was the personal wish of the owner of the Bolton residence, so no one dared to contradict him. It was a rather strange situation, and Dolly even understood the maid's state, but the Duke was amused by it all. He kept finding new ways to establish his order, and he started by asking him to wipe Dolly's forehead because she was sweating. The next day, our heroine taught her personal maids how to do laundry, explaining each step in detail. After listening to her recommendations, Layla snorted and asked why they should do this. There were specially trained servants for this. Dolly explained that these things belonged to the Duke, and since he was still recovering, it would be better for them to do the laundry themselves. Layla is back at it again, saying that she is a personal maid and that such menial work will damage her reputation. Miss Lopez replied that the Duke had appointed them as her maids, and if they did not want to do so, she could tell him to cancel the order. Then, looking at their sour faces, she asked if this was exactly what they were trying to achieve. Caroline replied that they were indeed her servants and would do their utmost to carry out her orders. Dolly noticed how differently the maids behaved. They clearly chose different tactics for dealing with her. Without focusing on this, she told them to go to the kitchen after washing and bring dinner to the Duke's room. Seeing her thoughtfulness, our hero asked why she looked tired and whether those two weren't helping her. After replying that she was fine, she added that she just thought it was a little wrong for them to be her servants. Caroline came from an ancient family that had been affiliated with the duchy's knightly Order of the Silver Lion for several centuries. The Clare family, to whom Layla belongs, have been the middlemen in many of the Boltons' trading ventures for many years. When the Duke asked why this was wrong, she replied that they were born into noble families and were not accustomed to hard work. And what they do together is a bit of an infringement on them. Is it really because of their noble origin? The Duke became worried that they might be offending her, and Dolly thought that they were certainly being straightforward, but at least they weren't being violent. She said out loud that everything was fine. Then he asked if she had ever felt disadvantaged when she did such work. She answered, a little surprised, that no, and Andres said that that was exactly it. She was not asking to do something that she had not done herself. Looking at her affectionately, he suddenly added that it was all because she was proud of her work. After thinking for a bit, Dolly replied that it really didn't matter whether a servant or a maid was a job. Work was always work. Having thanked him, she suddenly realized that he always supports her at the right moment. His consolation heals her heart. At that moment, it became clear to her that next to him, nothing in the world seemed so terrible or unfair. She felt at ease and happy with him, as if they had known each other for a very long time, and it was a wonderful feeling. Making a completely charming face, he brought his cheek closer to hers, and she asked if something had happened. "Your Highness." The answer was that he had obediently taken a bath and seen the doctor, and was now waiting for the promised kiss. He smiled and bowed his head slightly, as if to suggest that his patience would soon be rewarded. His posture conveyed a hint of light humor and tenderness at the same time, and in his heart there was anticipation of this moment, which he had longed for so long. Dolly could not resist such pranks, so she said that this was a reward for the obedient Duke and kissed him. Layla said it was simply outrageous that this low-class servant was telling them what to do, and she asked Carolina, they shouldn't let her get away with this, but she advised her not to do anything stupid now. She asked a question in return, and Layla had not yet noticed that the Duke was looking at Dolly with tenderness bordering on obsession. If you do something now, you could end up in Hannah's place, and you shouldn't forget what the butler mentioned. Asking if Caroline wasn't irritated, Layla added how that maid had drawn all the Duke's attention to herself. Lady Fisk replied that she did not care who the Duke was with or who he loved. Her only goal was to become a duchess. It was unpleasant for Layla to realize that both Caroline and the butler were essentially allowing that girl to do whatever she wanted. They had already approached the Duke's chambers when Lady Clare wondered if no one understood that the woman was just a pathetic servant. Dolly said that if the tea in Caroline's hands was brewed by them themselves, then she asked that it be brought in first. Then, turning to Layla, she said that the dishes were good today, and asked where the spare cutlery was. She replied that it was downstairs. He thought to himself that this girl was bossing them around again, despite her position, and it would be good to show her her place. If only she could lose face in front of everyone, then they would immediately understand everything themselves. And then it dawned on her that this was an idea, especially since Caroline had said that the Duke was only obsessed with her and nothing more. The maid, her pride hurt, found a way to expose the girl's pathetic nature to everyone. The doctor reported that the wound had healed, but advised against overexertion and that the Duke could otherwise return to normal life. Dolly was sincerely glad that he had recovered, and our hero said that it was all thanks to her efforts. Then he added that now they could finally fulfill that very promise and have dinner together when she returned. She remembered this appointed meeting very well, and even awaited this question with more impatience than she herself had expected. Now she looked into his radiant eyes and for some reason hesitated, and he continued that after that he would like to hear her answer. Her heart stopped for a moment, and then began to beat as if it had been replaced in those few seconds. Returning to her place, she thought only about this. She could not wait until they would finally have dinner alone. Then she would still have to give an answer regarding their 7-day agreement, but Dolly herself was a little afraid of her answer. Just one word, we launched a chain of fantasies, starting with innocent kisses and ending with the fact that he would not let her go anywhere that night. Just imagining this scene was enough for her to blush, and even she herself felt uncomfortable with such frankness. To cool my ardor a little, I thought that he would hardly say anything and would find something more affectionate. After going through the options, she stopped. Don't worry, I'll be gentle, and she'll probably add that she's done so much for him. Her emotions were running high, and it was hard for her to resist expressing her feelings openly. And immediately followed a quiet comment from Layla that she was like a monkey, a real disgrace, and how could the Duke like her? After all, the servants were from head to toe, but our heroine did not hear these words, but she was still wary. It seemed to her that everyone was whispering. The room was quiet, except for the usual cleaning sounds, but Dolly thought they had definitely just been whispering. Over the past few days, rumors about her and the master must have spread throughout the house, so what will happen when they start dating for real? She herself understood perfectly well that suddenly some servant wanted to become the Duke's passion, and that was simply unheard of. She guessed that they might also say that she was the illegitimate daughter of Count Lopez, who was born to one of the servants. Isn't it clear what her position is? And now she's seducing her master just like her mother. A real slut. Forcing herself not to think about it, she asked Caroline to help her change her clothes tonight. Her maid agreed, thinking to herself that all this was nothing. She just had to wait a little, and the Duke would understand everything himself. It will dawn on him that people who are not even accepted into decent society have no right to be around him. Catching Carolina's gaze, our heroine thought that surely both of her personal maids had the same opinion about her. And she was absolutely right in her guesses, but unlike the more prudent Lady Field, Layla decided to take everything into her own hands. Meanwhile, the Duke asked Vran to prepare for him tomorrow the information he had asked him to obtain. Then he asked if any troubles had happened in the mansion during the few days he had spent in bed with Dolly. When asked to clarify what he meant, he explained, for example, in places that had escaped his attention. Our hero felt uncomfortable saying this, but he still asked if maybe she was being bullied. He replied that of course not. He had followed the instructions and ordered his subordinates to show respect to Mrs. Dolly. This answer satisfied the Duke, and he added that Vrana had been serving in the residence for many years, so he should have acquired some resourcefulness. After changing for dinner, he decided to dot the I's and cross the T's, so he added that Dolly meant more to him than anyone else. And if someone does oppress her in this mansion, then he himself does not know what might happen. The butler replied that he understood everything, thinking to himself that the last thing he could do was to obey orders without question. The Duke also said that he wanted to meet with the heads of all the vassal families and ask that they be notified of this, and also to agree on an audience with the Emperor, and the butler asked if there was some good reason. Having replied that, of course, our hero was thinking about it, he had not yet received her answer, but he hoped that his family happiness was just around the corner. He said a little thoughtfully that this was a very serious matter, connected with the appearance of another owner of the residence. Dolly thanked Carolina for her help, adding that she didn't expect her to be so good at this matter. The second maid said that the Duke was so handsome that she should also look appropriate to be near him. Layla asked if the lady had forgotten anything and explained that she meant table etiquette, since no one had taught her this. Dolly thought that in the past she had secretly spied on her brother when he was learning the label, having only the opportunity to imitate. The maid continued that if something went wrong and she violated etiquette, she would be laughed at during dinner together. Our heroine was thinking she didn't care about herself, but she didn't want the Duke to be discussed because of her. Although she doesn't want to do this, however, so that the Duke doesn't embarrass himself because of her, she will have mercy and help this time, said Layla. Moreover, there is still time before dinner, and if she teaches, it will be better if Dolly can at least approximately imitate. Overjoyed, our heroine agreed, although she wouldn't learn much, at least he wouldn't be ashamed of her. Wondering why Layla had suddenly become so friendly, Caroline guessed that she was probably up to something. As a diligent student, Dolly listened attentively to all her maid's comments and tried to follow her instructions precisely. She knew that every piece of advice and every word would help her become better and more worthy, and the Duke would not be ashamed of her in society. "It will do somehow," said Layla, but noted that the movements were quite good, and the lady seemed to have talent. Having thanked her, Dolly thought that Layla was a little harsh in her expressions, but she was a good person. And she even offered to teach her table etiquette. She wanted to practice some more, but the maid said that it was time to go. Suddenly, Caroline spoke up and asked if it was too early for dinner and if Lady Dolly was really going to go right away. But Layla replied that this was their dinner together, and arriving early was not considered a breach of etiquette. She added that some things are better done in advance, and Dolly agreed, taking her at her word. She saw nothing wrong with it. The Duke had singled her out because of her humble position, as expected. Now she is much more free in her actions, and of course it is not that she is not afraid of death, but she did not want to see the Duke suffer. Although she thought that if the Duke had found out about this, he would probably have stopped it immediately, because she felt how much he valued her. And even though the reasons for such ardent attention puzzled her, she still wanted to do everything in her power for him. She also didn't know how long their relationship would last, but she hoped that by the time it ended, she would have nothing to regret. I thought that I shouldn't get so hung up on it, but rather that I needed to prepare everything as quickly as possible before the Duke arrived. There were too many servants in the dining room, so our heroine asked who all these people were. The answer was that perhaps, since the Duke had called the dinner important, everyone took it seriously and wanted to serve her. It sounded logical, but not to Caroline, who suspected that Layla was definitely up to some dirty trick. Realizing that the food had already been served, Dolly decided that it was okay to do it for the Duke, without paying attention to others. She was still somewhat confused when Layla handed her the spare utensils and said that they were just as necessary as before. She also said that one way or another, it would come to that, and that this way she would still be able to test out the knowledge she had acquired about etiquette. Trying to look casual, she still couldn't help but notice the sidelong glances of the servants. Although they did not look at her directly, it was clear that they did not take their close attention off her. However, at that moment, the Duke's words came back to her mind, that she was simply doing her job and doing it well. These words reminded her that her efforts do not go unnoticed, and that she should not dwell on the little things. She took a deep breath, building confidence and calm within herself, feeling that everything she did mattered to him. Then a whisper was heard, Look, she really ate it. She really is going out of her way to win the master's favor." Previously, they thought that this was a joke and a pathetic sight, and wondered why the Duke suddenly needed a servant. It turns out for this. It was like a dog ready to eat all sorts of scraps at the first whistle of its owner, and it also tried to imitate secular etiquette. How could she not be ashamed indeed? Only someone like her could brazenly sneak into her master's bed. There was only one thing that Caroline didn't understand why Dolly did this. Was the Duke's obsession really just a bluff? Layla asked to continue, because after all, this was her only value, which is why the Duke keeps her near him. And now she has shown everyone her insignificance, which she will never get rid of or hide under luxurious clothes. It finally dawned on our heroine that this had all been done on purpose, and the maid didn't even try to hide it. On the contrary, she went wild, adding that Dolly was even ready to give up her worthless life just to stay with the master. Such a pathetic and unhappy person, full of delusional illusions, has now won everyone's sympathy and must be thanked. Layla demanded that the mistress admit that she was just a dog that could be thrown out and replaced at any moment. After hearing this insulting speech, our heroine was initially upset she did not expect that a noble lady was capable of such baseness. Then she remembered that such situations had already happened in her life, and it was not surprising that Layla showed her true nature. The only thing that really upset her was that she hadn't done anything bad to them. They were just taking advantage of their position. Remembering that even her brother had given in to such behavior, she decided that it was time to put an end to this humiliation and injustice. She realized that she would achieve nothing if she was afraid or resigned, because dignity is something that you cannot allow yourself to lose. These thoughts pierced her heart like a sharp blade, causing internal resistance and a desire to change the situation. Looking at Layla, she heard that this was not the expression she should have on her face. She should be crying and suffering. She should reproach herself for her shamelessness, but Dolly felt the strength within her, and she must fight for her honor and respect. That's why I listened rather coldly to Layla's words about how she could not be ashamed of her insignificance. And now she knew for sure that no one had the right to humiliate her or treat her with contempt. So she asked if it was only because Layla made her feel ashamed of her origin, which no one chose. Her voice grew firmer as she continued that she personally had done nothing, and her conscience was clear. At that moment, the Duke appeared and asked if she had also arrived early, and if she, like him, could not wait for this meeting. Our heroine didn't really expect him to come so early, so she asked why he came now. He answered sincerely, because he really wanted to see her as soon as possible, and it turns out that she was already here too. His voice was gentle, with a slight smile that hid the trepidation inside as he added, "That's what a mental connection means." She really didn't expect to see him so early, but her heart was relieved because fortunately he hadn't heard the recent conversation. The Duke meanwhile continued that his soul had been languishing in anticipation of this meeting, and he was happy to see how Aphrodite had descended. And Dolly is even more beautiful today, like flowers blooming in the spring sun, dazzling and intoxicating. With a touch of irony, she noted that the Duke, as always, was giving very old-fashioned compliments. Addressing everyone, he asked if everyone present thought that Dolly was the most attractive girl in the Empire, and he asked to tell him, and although a radiant smile shone on his face, there were unimaginably cold notes in his tone. All the servants did not dare to disobey, and almost in unison answered that he was right, and the mistress's beauty was truly dazzling. The Duke smiled happily, and Caroline became curious whether he was aware or whether Dolly was free in her decisions. And Layla hissed that she really would have dared to talk to her like that, if only the Duke had not come. When he asked her why she had a fork in her hand, Dolly replied that she was a little hungry and apologized for not waiting for him, to which our hero replied that it was no big deal, she was probably really hungry, and suggested eating together. He gallantly seated his lady and even offered her a spoon, but something in the general atmosphere was beginning to bother him. Our heroine saw nothing reprehensible in this and became so docile not because of fear of death. She just didn't want to see him suffer anymore. On the contrary, she wanted to see him happy like he was now. She took it upon herself to check all his dishes and was prepared for whatever might happen to her. Possessing inner determination and a sense of belonging, she understood that this was the only way she could show her care and trust. But she trusted him so much that she was sure that whatever happened, it would not be his fault. She knew that he truly cared for her and genuinely wanted only the best for her. She even liked this new feeling of trust, liked the feeling that she could completely rely on the person she trusted. Sensing something was missing, the Duke said that she had always been a pedantic person who strictly kept her word. He continued that, knowing her character, she would never have come early just to have a snack before dinner. Looking straight into her heart with his piercing gaze, he asked what she had just been doing. Layla thought it was time to end the interrupted conversation, and she greeted the gentleman. Then she said that it was all because of Lady Dolly, who had not managed to finish her work before his arrival, and that he is too kind in forgiving her for pretending not to understand that it was her fault for not fulfilling her duties. In a stern tone, the Duke asked again what other job it was, and Layla replied that it was checking his dishes for poison. Our hero had no idea that his precious Dolly had been in mortal danger for the last few days. Moreover, he gave different instructions, and Dolly wondered whether he would reproach her for acting at her own discretion. A mixture of anger and anxiety fought within him, and he realized that trust and control must go hand in hand. Otherwise, he risks losing the most valuable thing. He looked at Layla with a stern gaze, suspecting her of evil intentions. He was determined to immediately deal with this situation so that nothing like this would ever happen again. His voice was cold and determined, his eyes blazing with anger as he asked if she had made Dolly do it. Our heroine interrupted him and said that no one forced her to do this, she made this decision herself. Previously, she misinterpreted the reason why he chose her, because she is a person of low status. But now she wants to do at least something for him, and added in an apologetic tone that this is all solely because of her. To which the Duke replied that it was not her fault, but that he was not doing enough to prove to her how important she was to him. Hugging her, he continued that more than anything in the world he was afraid that something irreparable might happen to her. That she is the most important person to him, and no matter how many years pass, she will forever remain the one for whom it is worth continuing to move forward. He said that he had always loved her, much longer than she thought and much more than she could imagine. That she is his meaning, his support, and he will do everything to protect her and make her happy, because she is part of his destiny. For a brief moment, her heart skipped a beat, hearing the Duke's confession so quickly, but this thrill was soon replaced by deep doubts. Meanwhile, Layla remembered her father's words. He told her that very soon she would become a maid at the Duke of Bolton's estate. She replied, "Yes. Why is it a dirty job for a maid? It would be better if he found her a suitable husband as soon as possible." The father replied that, of course, high-class maids were no different from those low-class cleaners. Only the daughters of vassal nobles can become high-class maids for an influential aristocrat. This is especially true for unmarried aristocrats, who can choose a bride from among themselves, such as the handsome Duke of Bolton. And his daughter is a real diamond, and becoming the wife of a noble man is a privilege available only to true aristocrats. Layla could not bear the thought that not she, not even another noble lady, but some servant girl was eager to take this place. And she blurted out, begging the master to come to his senses, because Dolly was just an insignificant servant doing dirty work. Even if she gained temporary favor from him, it would not change the fact that she was of low birth. Testing the master for poison, dying for the master is a sacred duty, and our hero clung to these words. He replied that then, as Dolly's personal servant, she should share the burden with her mistress. Seeing the bread, Layla thought that this couldn't be. She was the diamond of the Clar family, a purebred aristocrat with high dignity. The Duke would never have done that to her, would never have compared her to some kind of cleaning lady and demanded such a thing. But she didn't know this man at all, and had no idea what this man was really capable of. Our hero barked, "Eat!" He was extremely determined. He could not allow his lady to be insulted in his house. However, the personal maid considered this to be beneath her dignity, and she would never submit to these outrages. Seeing that the Duke was adamant, she decided to take a different path and began to beg him and ask him to spare her. Caroline understood how all this could end if Layla did this. She would become a laughingstock in social circles. At this point, our heroine spoke up and said that she was her servant, and this carelessness was caused by her poor management. And since she is to blame for this, she would like to choose her punishment herself, if, of course, his lordship does not mind. Dolly understood that Layla had really crossed all boundaries, and her behavior deserved punishment. The Duke said she could do as she saw fit, and then she said privileges and status. She took a few steps forward and continued, "Does acquiring all this really change a person?" The maid asked, offended, what she was doing, and added that she did not need her hypocritical sympathy. To which Dolly replied in a calm tone that she had heard this many times before, and each time it was the same thing. She is aware that the cream of society with whom fate brings her together laughs at her and despises her. All this never appeared to her, but was only her status and foundations, therefore, when they find themselves in the same situation as her, they will become her. "Why does she say that?" asked Lila, and Dolly replied that she had indeed admired the Duke of Bolton I all her life. He was a truly great hero who overthrew the old empire and gave freedom to the slaves. Even though there is still a lot of injustice at this time, she still waits impatiently. That the new empire for which Mr. Hart fought with all his might would one day become a truly just country. And from that day on, Lady Claire is stripped of her title as a high-ranking maid and, as punishment, demoted to the rank of cleaning lady. Layla screamed that she was a diamond of noble birth and that suddenly she would wash the floors. It was too cruel, and would her pampered body be able to withstand it? She continued to shout that she was the precious daughter of the Clare family, and Dolly simply did not dare to order her around. She suddenly shut up when her gaze met the Duke's, and a wave of horror ran through her body, as if a warning that she had better retreat now, otherwise she would face unpredictable consequences. Silence reigned in the dining room. The servants fell silent as if holding their breath, waiting for further words or actions. There was tension in the air, as if everyone felt that something important or fateful was about to happen. Caroline looked at the amused Duke and thought that for Lila, perhaps, this was too lenient a punishment. But she will never be able to forget the expression on his face and the Duke, and whether this is really the Andres Bolton that was rumored. Our hero, meanwhile, was telling Dolly that the maid had been so impudent with her that she could have punished her more severely. Then he gently added that she was actually very kind and asked her not to worry because he would protect her. He asked her to promise him that she would never do anything again that would harm her, otherwise he would blame himself until the end of time. He said that if something happened to her, he would definitely follow her anywhere she would go ahead, and he would be right behind her. And he always wants to be with her and never leave her and will not spare anyone who hurts her. Everyone in the dining room fell silent when he added that he would bury everyone along with himself if anyone offended her, every single one of them. This speech touched our heroine very much, so she promised him that she would never harm herself again. But he wants to follow her and says that he will bury everyone along with himself, and therefore asked not to joke like that anymore. After this, our lovers promised each other all sorts of things, and the little incident was forgotten. Now they could begin to have dinner together, because there was nothing else to interfere with them, and they were hungry. She looked at him with her eyes full of tenderness and silent love, as if trying to convey the depth of her feelings without words. Seeing her gaze, he felt warmth and awe inside, and his heart began to beat faster, because for him she is the meaning of life. The butler's heart sank when the Duke asked him to check the food again. He knew that everything had already been checked, but the gentleman decided to double-check everything again, and said less words, more action. Vrana decided that there was no point in arguing and silently agreed with his decision, realizing that peace was more important than any argument right now. I thought that even though he was so angry, the Duke was able to control himself as if he had been voluntarily tamed by Lady Lopez. At that moment, his former maid called him and told him that he had a message from that very same master. A couple of days ago, he sent that gentleman a report on the Duke's strange behavior and the results of the investigation into Miss Lopez. In the reply letter, he read that Casanova becomes faithful to only one. The helpless fop is now bold and merciless. There must be an explanation for these oddities, but the Duke's incompetence before the poisoning cannot simply be written off as pretense. The body of Andres Bolton, who escaped from his deathbed after being poisoned, now seems to be occupied by someone else. Vrana thought that he could go crazy, and how that gentleman came to such unthinkable conclusions. The letter also stated that, based on the information provided, Dolly Lopez had never been in contact with the Duke. She, like everyone else, is perplexed about his sympathy, and the probable reason for these oddities is caused by her. However, it was the first manifestation of Andres's anomaly, and it might be possible to take advantage of it. The butler reported that his lordship should be in his room, but our heroine said that she was looking specifically for him. He became curious why him and Dolly, a little embarrassed, said that she wanted to ask one question. She said she wanted to know if she was like any of the ladies the Duke had known before. Vrana asked her to clarify what she meant, and heard in response that perhaps there was a species among them. There was a lady whom the Duke once loved dearly. Perhaps she simply reminds him of that lady.